before falling into the arms of the Prota. A small flashback is made at the moment when the blonde girl arrives with the organization to that meeting. She realizes that the Prota is already there. By his attire, she realizes that he is completely different from the others who are standing next to him. Even by his attire that is completely alien to the real world, she tells herself that this event is her last chance because Lee Chang-suk had killed her older sister, who before dying had told her everything she had learned about the tutorial world. Although it was not information to die, in her mind everything she told him was recorded, including what she knew about the character Lee Hoi, the only survivor of the Hell difficulty. She remembers that he published a lot of information for the newcomers about the traps, but the community treated him as a liar. She is shocked to see him and stares at him while a guy is talking to the boss. The POTRA notices her gaze and she wonders if he will know that she is the informant, and without a plan she decides to approach him, but she is attacked by the boss. From the perspective of the PROTA, he thinks that for a long time things have become complicated. Every time he stands out from the others and tries to solve problems, every time he interferes, the problem becomes bigger and brings problems to the others. That's why he didn't want to be the leader of the team. Although in that world it seems that he will never be alone. He comes out of his thoughts when he sees the purple-haired man making a fuss while coughing from a blow he threw while blinking. The man asks him, exalted and dramatizing pain, why he hits people for no reason. He tells him that this is not right, and the people behind him support him, giving different comments as insults to his person. The PROTA spreads his wings and tells them that if they don't like it they should go after him. He tells them they are cowards, and everyone around him is amazed at how majestic his wings are. Quickly, the purple-haired man tells him that there is a misunderstanding and that he can explain everything. He tells him that it won't be a bad story for him and asks him to give him 5 minutes. The man approaches and tries to hit him, but the PROTA quickly flies and dodges the blow, but hits him, telling him to think that it might increase his resistance to pain. The man tells his people to get rid of him, and a boy with a sword runs out to attack him. The PROTA grabs the hand the boy is holding the sword with and avoids his attack. He quickly pushes him and hears how the boy complains in pain. The POTRA thinks that the defense function of the system works on him. He comes out of his thoughts and jumps on top of the boy when he sees that there is another one with an axe waiting for him. The POTRA thinks that the strength of that boy is comparable to a goblin instructor, but his posture is a disaster, so he comes out of his thoughts and kicks him in the chest. He thinks that the system mitigates the impact, but that doesn't mean that it goes away completely, so he continues to hit him. When the man falls completely to the ground, the POTRA thinks that the defense of the system is not perfect. It thinks that it connected perfectly to the arms, internal organs, and neck bones. The system nullifies all attacks using swords and mitigates the impact of the blows. Because of the limitations, joint strikes and choking skills cannot be used for a long time, but aiming for a critical and instantaneous hit will connect an effective hit. Even if there is a quick regeneration, they will suffer pain for a brief moment. The PROTA comes out of his thoughts and realizes that Kim Min-hyuk and other players are surrounding the confederation of what he thinks are bastards. He wonders if they will be trying to stop them from running away and realizes that they thought fast. The PROTA thinks that even if they all run away, he is confident that he will capture them all, and comes out of his thoughts when he hears how someone tells him that his moves are good, besides asking him what skills he uses. He is approached by a man with long black hair, and the POTRA wonders who he is, as he thought he was a gambler. He hears Kim Min-hyuk shouting that the man is Myung Jin Chan, and the POTRA thinks of the normal 6th floor. The man tells the POTRA that he is not the only one with skills, and from his sword starts to come out a violet light. The POTRA tells him that if he was done talking to come over and play some more. The POTRA sees Myung Jin Chan approaching and wonders what skill is coming out of his sword. He wonders if it is a buff, and says to himself that maybe it has an instant acceleration effect like the goblin instructor. From the POTRA's sword a blue light starts to come out and the battle begins. The man throws his spear at him, and the POTRA tells him that he cannot rely on his spear in such an impatient way like that. He hits him in the belly with his sword and the man shrieks from the pain. The POTRA thinks to himself that the knife attacks in that place really do hurt, and asks the man about how he can throw his weapon at a time like that. He wonders if that thing will be one of the 5 players in the top and turns to see the leader of the organization. He wonders if he should take care of those pig bastards already, and as he approaches he sees how the man pales. Suddenly the POTRA finds himself sleeping on the grass, thinking about how perfect that place is to take a nap. although it would have been completely perfect if it weren't for the complaints of those he calls pig bastards. An announcement appears telling him that his basic sword skill is now at level 7. He thinks about how the members of that group were extremely weak, and that allowed him to try many different combat patterns, although he didn't expect them to be weaker than a goblin. The POTRA thinks about how he has been developing his sword skills to evade his stronger opponents and attack passively, blocking with his shield and attacking their vital parts with speed. However, that time, as the guys were very weak, he was able to attack proactively using various methods and thinks about how he feels like hitting them some more. But it won't be his turn for a while, and he sees how the people around him hit the members of the Confederation. There is a flashback where the POTRA thinks that Kim Min-jaeuk made his move when he started to beat the members of the organization, rather than fighting together. That guy had used ropes to tie up the ones that the POTRA had knocked unconscious. He wondered when he had prepared the rope, for it seemed that he was planning to suppress them with his strength if anything happened. After all, the representative members of the Confederation were defeated. When PROTA was wondering what to do with them, the girl who had made eye contact with him appeared. Her name was Park Young-a. She had big blue eyes, and as one of the victims she was the one who leaked information to Kim Min-jaeuk. The girl had suggested to the POTRA a way to neutralize the representative Confederation. The most effective method was to send the challengers from the first and second floor, and be prepared for anything in case they sought revenge. Also not allowing them to do the same things to the new challengers, using the representative Confederation as punching bags for sparring practice as punishment, as well as using them for training, would help the victims overcome their fear, and unite to be strong enough to fight back. After sharing her thoughts, the girl gathered everyone in the field, told them about the evil deeds of the representative Confederation, and the pain that the victims endured. Through that action, she gained everyone's understanding, even those who were not involved with them, and appealed for support for the victims, condemning the Federation. With every word the girl said, she made all the victims unite. Following Kim Min-jaeuk, the challengers stepped back and supported the girl, because the confidence with which the girl spoke showed that it was better for her to solve the problem. Back to reality. In the field, the representative Confederation is helping the challengers as punching bags. Although there was criticism that it was morally wrong, things ended up like this because there was no better solution than the one proposed by the girl. With nothing else to do, the POTRA thinks about 13 hours left until the end of the event. He thinks about whether he should take a nap, but his thoughts are interrupted when the girl tells him that he had worked hard. She sits next to him and they both remain silent for a long while. Cutting the moment, the PROTA tells him that it was an awkward moment and she apologizes for that. She thanks him on behalf of her older sister and the other victims, to which he quickly wonders about that girl's older sister. She tells him that she has something to tell him. The beginning of Park Young-a's story contained everything. Even the event of that day, the story before the tutorial, inside the tutorial, and the death of her sister. Park Young-a asks PROTA to please lend her his strength. She tells him that she is aware that asking for something like that is shameless, but she would definitely pay that debt. PROTA tells her that paying him back is not a problem and asks her if she wants him to train her. She tells him no. What she wants is his strength at that moment, and the somewhat confused PROTA asks if she wants him to get her fruits like in the manhwas. He remembers something and hands her a gun. He tells her that that is a magic tool that causes an explosion within a short range. He explains to her that it can only fire 5 rounds, but it has no user condition and is quite powerful. She asks him about how much, and the PROTA tells her that he doesn't know for sure as he has never used it, so she should use it sparingly. She thanks him and tells him that from now on she will live for the good of others. She will fight to protect others, and this is how she will pay her debt. The PROTA tells her that he thinks she is paying the wrong person. As he sees her walking away, he asks her where she is going, and she tells him that she is going to prove it. On another side of the field, the leader of the Confederation is tied up and receiving blows from some people. In pain, he thinks that they will see what will happen, but he sees how Park Young-a approaches him with a gun and asks him what he has in his hand. The PROTA asks the girl what she intends to do, but does not receive an answer. The girl shoots in the air and the PROTA wonders what the girl is trying to do. He sees her take out a bottle of lubricant and smear some on her fingers. She grabs the man's face and sticks her fingers in his eyes, making him scream in pain, and in his right eye she buries her gun. The man screams in pain. Blood and foam come out of his eyes. She shoots him and the PROTA thinks of instant death. The girl, to prevent him from being cured by the system, blew his head off in an instant. She turns and starts walking. The PROTA gives him a disapproving look and she comments that that gun was quite useful. He thinks of her being crazy, and that it was surprising that there was someone crazier than him. Park Young-a reappeared after taking revenge against his sister's enemy without any emotion or purpose. He raised his hand and made a statement. Guarding the laws and public order of the Korean servant, a civilian militia was born. 2 days had passed since the unification. At first the fifth-floor raid was supposed to be summed up immediately, but the POTRA had put their plans aside to help the founding of the militia. PROTA tells how numerous victims joined and became its members. Some had promised to work with Park Young-a before the day of unification. Some were hostile against the girl's actions. But a large number of challengers found inspiration in the girl's Valentine and joined the militia. Kim Min-jaeuk and PROTA are having a conversation. Kim tells him that the girl looks like Joan of Arc, and PROTA tells him that she looks more like a demon covered in blood. The players who destroyed the Rep Guild, including Kim and POTRA, joined the militia, which established a number of rules and law and order required to ensure that the challengers have a minimum of safety and rights, which was not to protect the players or assailants, but the weak, the lower floor challengers, and for that purpose they worked on forming some foundational rules. The first rule decreed that assault was not allowed. The second rule decreed that rape was not allowed. The third rule decreed that robbery was not allowed. The fourth rule decreed that violating the freedom of others was not allowed. Some people objected, considering that breaking the rules would result in punishment, according to the internal rules of the civilian militia, but Park Young-a and supporters went ahead. The discussions ended. 3 members of the representative guild were executed and the other members were put on probation to be observed. But due to executions by firearms and all kinds of violence at its peak, the minds of the remaining members were completely destroyed. That gave the PROTA and his friends to understand that they should not worry about a rebellion. But a portion of the militia gave up on clearing the tutorial and were assigned to the second floor just in case anything happened. The PROTA and his friends realized that it was necessary to guide the newcomers and give them an explanation of the rules. Kim Min-jaeuk would prepare the newcomers who would come during the next session, distribute notices and manuals among the community, and that's how things finally ended in the early morning of the next day. In another part of the tutorial, the PROTA complains about some drops that fall on his hand. He thinks about the annoyance that it causes him and that this practical work did not fit him. The POTRA is in a kind of vault and reaches the end where he sees an iron door. He realizes that it is the boss room of the 5th floor. He thinks about what skill with the sword he has climbed. So it was time to say goodbye to that floor. Although he was worried, he was confident in his abilities and had faith that he would do well. He opens the door and purple rays come out of it. At the end of the door he sees a green lizard person sitting on his back, with a brown panty, a cape of that color, and next to the animal there is a newt. The PROTA gets a notification that the challenge will start in 30 seconds. He wonders if he should just defeat him, if it is a sudden one-on-one duel, and thinks about that single lizard person being stronger than a horde of goblins big enough to fill an entire city. He gets a notification that tells him that he must defeat the Dark Shadow Warrior ETHALT. The PROTA quickly draws his sword and shield because that notification gave the signal that the fight had already begun. The lizard stops and the PROTA thinks that being a dark warrior it was likely that he would not make a first move. He realizes how his enemy only observes him and that by his posture he will not be a common enemy. Because his aura is different, PROTA thinks that it is his first time seeing such a cautious enemy. The distance between them is very wide and he does not want to hurry. He scolds himself for being so nervous and realizes that by the posture they both have their abilities are similar, giving him to think that at least he is not overwhelmingly powerful. The PROTA, seeing his face, realizes that it seems to be made of stone, but thinks that it doesn't make sense since it was a monster, although he was eager to check it out. When the battle is about to begin, the lizard woman asks the PROTA about why she rejects him. He answers her if there is any reason not to do so, followed by telling her crazy lizard. The woman tells him that that is going too far and that it is wrong to judge others based on how they look. The PROTA thinks that she had not said something about her appearance and that it seemed that even in her own species she is not particularly attractive. He tells himself that he should concentrate because that Idalta is different from the other lizard men. You only had to see her strength, speed, the way she gripped her spear, and the way she approached a fight. It was something completely different from what the PROTA knew. The lizard woman, instead of rushing in aggressively like the other lizard men, she moved carefully and efficiently. After having dodged her opponent's attack calmly, she launches a counter-attack with that opening. That incredible reaction speed allows her to dodge with just a blink of an eye an attack, Plus she has an ability that allows her to vaporize her body and launch a barrage of physical attacks. The Prota thinks that she may have an ability that simply increases her reaction speed or her cognition, and the vaporization ability with her self-evasion may be an extra improvement. But her vaporization ability also has something extra, and that is that it has an incredibly short duration. The Prota gives her a blow with his sword and analyzes that she could dodge it, but she only received the onslaught with the shield in the face, which gives her to seem that it is not possible to use it continuously, similar to the blink of an eye. The Prota thinks about forcing her to use her vaporization ability with normal attacks, then use the blink and wings to finish with a combo. They are battling, and the lizard woman tells the Prota that he really is someone cruel, but if that is how he will be, she will use her brute strength to keep him by her side. Immediately, the Prota thinks if she is also a Yandere and how many types of character she has inside. She runs to attack him, and the Prota thinks that if she is blinded by anger, it is a blessing for him that she enters like this from the front. He thinks that her vigor is incredible and that he will not be able to stop her from the front, so he activates his power of concentration and manifests to the lizard woman to test him, trying to stab him. The lizard woman breaks the shield of the Prota with her trident. The Prota cuts her hand and part of the arm with which the woman was holding her weapon. She tries to attack him, and he uses his blink power to push her away. She cries for the loss of her arm, and he thinks that they only exchanged a few blows. Besides, she didn't use her vaporization ability, so things didn't go according to his plan. But seeing the results, she had ended up suffering more, because he launched his attack thinking that he was going to lose his arm, and he succeeded. She screams at him that he is too cruel, and that she saw his intentions to kill her. If she had dodged a little later, it would not have been her arm, but her head would have been cut off. She tells him that if this is how he will act, she will not see him as a partner but as an enemy that he must kill. She starts to get bigger and stronger. The Prota is amazed by what he had just seen. He thinks if this is the beginning of the second phase, and the lizard woman gives a strong step that breaks part of the floor, the battle begins. She stomps again, and the Prota thinks that she could destroy the room, and by the appearance more corpulent, his enemy looks like a boss monster of the game. She runs to attack him and manages to push him against a wall. He thinks about how long she can have that form because he has already used blink many times and he only has 2 charges left. She throws a fireball that he manages to dodge by ducking. The Prota runs out with his sword. From this comes out a blue energy, and when he is close, the lizard woman stabs it in his abs. He spreads his wings and she throws a fireball towards them. The Prota thinks he could die, but he does not give up and draws a great inner strength that allows him to fly high. Back on the ground, he comments to his enemy how strong he is. She tells him if he had come this far to change his mind, and he asks her to give him some time. The lizard woman asks him what he means by give him time. The Prota thinks that the woman who was jumping on him before was only calmed down by him telling her that he was going to think about it. He keeps thinking if he is a beauty in the eyes of the lizard people. He tells the lizard woman to give him a moment and thinks that he managed to stop her for quite some time. But he thinks that she is crazy and he doesn't know when she will attack him again. He quickly takes out his board and grabs the recovery and stamina positions. He drinks them, and the woman asks him if he is done thinking. He tells her to please give him a little more time since he needed to take up energy to concentrate on his thoughts. He takes out his sword and starts to repeat himself to concentrate. He thinks of an ability that had a 90% chance of failure even when he was training in the waiting room. If he fails, she will counterattack immediately. The Prota thinks that using blink offensively was quite costly. He didn't think he would have to use it together with the wings of Teleria, but he has another trick up his sleeve. He thinks about the way he holds his weapon, but just using flicker to make his sword reach the opponent is not enough. If he only does that, using the wings is a better option. So he must use flicker and blade together, the speed in which he carries his sword and the speed in which he goes out with flicker. If he puts those two together, he can go against his enemy in high speed and cut her. The Prota goes against her and shouts blinking orb, cutting her in half, activates his wings, and when he is close to her he cuts her neck, lands, and falls near the tail of the lizard woman, who grabs his leg and knocks him to the ground. The blow was so big that the Prota can't get up. He raises his head and wonders if he had defeated his enemy and crawls to see if he was right. He sees the lizard woman and bloodied and with her tongue out of her mouth, so he thinks that somehow he managed to survive. He thinks that it has been a long time since he swam in the Styx and that his body doesn't move well. He thinks that he should use a potion, but thinks that he should just enter the portal and use blink, but realizes that usually when he completes a boss room he would recover immediately. He thinks that the message that he had completed the room has not appeared. He comes out of his thoughts when he hears the lizard woman telling him that he is a very cruel and horrible human. He sees her slowly crawling away, and the Prota thinks about how crazy she is. He thinks about the lizard woman's sex drive, and that she has overcome just being focused on her suitor. He is still shocked by that, and that only he can move a little, plus Flicker is still in confrontation. His wings with Valeria, but not his gun. He thinks about the gun he gave Park Yona and how useful it would be if he had it. He comes out of his thoughts when he sees the lizard woman approach and tell him that she will make him her husband. He thinks about the possibility of biting his tongue and dying, but realizes that this is not the time to do that. As the Prota watches as the lizard woman approaches and tells him that she will make him her husband, he wonders why she will be so obsessed with him. He tells himself that he should concentrate and pulls out his board to see how his player status is. He notices that Flicker is still on cooldown, but he can still use the Valeria wings. He can move his hands and his brain is still working fine. He sees a heat stone option and wonders if that might work, as lizard people are still reptiles after all, and they are cold-blooded. He thinks about reptiles being extremely weak to temperature changes, so he pulls the stone off the board and yells at the lizard woman to get close to him if she can, as he will shove the fireball down her throat. She keeps approaching him and comments that her husband will do it. He tells her that she is annoying, and being on the verge of death, she wonders how that is the only thing she can say. That makes her upset. She raises her hand and slams it on the ground. She stands still, and the Prota thinks about how she stopped moving. He wonders if she must have run out of strength as he hears her coughing. He approaches and she tells him that he told her that she was strong. He never called her despicable or cowardly, nor did he curse her as a servant of the devil. She tells him that he recognized her and that Iswila is his other half. Even though he is a despicable little human, he was a strong male and tries to say that is why he would make him her husband, but the prayer goes as far as making him her. The Prota wonders if she really died as the lizard woman is no longer talking or moving. He thinks about how she was getting scared and she wakes up telling him he is an idiot. He asks her if he was ever rejected by his kind. She tells him that, with a strange ability, the defensive nature that was long ago removed from a lizard man's instincts and sadness. The Prota asks him if that is why she was happy when he said something good to her. He tells her that he feels a small taste of bittersweetness and guilt. But even if she had some kind of sad story, they were destined to kill each other. He apologizes, and into her mouth he puts the heat stone he had been hiding in his hand. At that moment he gets a notification saying that he has completed the 5th floor of the tutorial Hell difficulty. Another notification comes saying that all status abnormalities and wounds will be healed. Another notification comes saying that he has gained 1000 points as a reward for completing for the first time. Another notification comes saying that he has completed consecutive revenge floors in a single session, and for that he has gained 1.000 points as an extra reward. Two other notifications appear. One says that many gods have a negative view of him and that 3,200 points will be lowered. But the other notification says that many gods have a positive view of him and that is why he has earned 4,700 points. The Prota thinks that he has completed the 5th floor and that a notification appears saying that with his player history as a base he will be given additional rewards. Another notification appears saying that many gods have suggested giving him a special skill instead of an additional reward. 74 gods in favor of that and 3 against. A notification appears asking him if he will approve that. He thinks that there is something complicated and that there is definitely something behind that. Since a gift from so many gods, it has to be different from an authority skill. The Prota thinks that the last skill he got that way was wisdom from before the time of Babel. It is a good skill, but he has been starting to have more thoughts after talking to the monsters. He thinks about the probability that the gods are giving him gifts as a test and that they are enjoying his reactions as a result, as he doesn't think they are giving him a gift to help him. He realizes that there are more gods in favor than when he received the wisdom from before Babel times, and he thinks it is because that many gods want to give him that new ability. The Prota is anxious about the decision he must make. If he rejects the ability, the impression the gods will have of him may do much more. That ability may be unexpectedly good, so he accepts the ability and he gets a notification saying he has achieved summoning the deceased. But it does not tell him what level. He gets a notification describing that the authority of an unknown god who refused to reveal his identity to the challenger. That ability can be used on an object which has the soul of the deceased imprinted on it as a means to revive them for a period of time. That is an authority constrained by a god. He has 5 uses remaining, and as an extra bonus the god of slowness was worried about him. The Prota thinks about how amazing it is to be able to revive a dead person. Sarcastically, he thinks about how it's better to forget the game skills, as his new ability was at a miracle level. He thinks about if it was okay for something as amazing as that to appear, and wonders on if it's not completely related to the 5th floor. A green light with a yellow diamond appears above the lizard. He is given the explanation that it is the soul stone of the lizard woman Idalta, the soul stone of the strongest and the most powerful warrior among the lizard men inhabiting the Aden swamp. That stone could sell it in the store window. After reading that, the Prota wonders if that is not telling him that he should revive Idalta, because if he does that she will start saying that he is her husband and will come for him. He wonders if they think he is crazy enough to dig his own grave. A notification arrives saying that the god of adventure feels sorry for that actions. The god of dedication has resentment towards him. The god of chaos feels bored and the god of combat condemns him strongly. The Prota thinks he should just ignore that and a portal opens. He thinks from any point of view all those gods have a screw loose. So he enters the portal and falls into a field where Kirikiri tells him that trampling on a woman's heart is a very cruel thing to do. Then he tells her to stop and asks her if she wanted to see him mate with a lizard woman. She tells him to pass, and in the place where he was before, 2 notifications appear. The first one says to please designate the members of his group before entering the 6th stage. And the second notification shows him the current group members where out of 5 people the first one is him. While the Prota and Kirikiri eat cake, she tells him that he is probably the first one to have been courted by the 5th floor guardian. She tells him that the reason the gods were interested out of the blue in him was because of a rare event like that. He asks her if she is treating his virginity as a joke, but she tells him to forget that and that there is something he wants to know. He tells her that he has been thinking about it since before, but after the 5th floor he seems more certain. She tells him she can't tell him that and wonders if now Kirikiri is reading his mind too. He remembers that the goblins and lizard men have their own cultures and societies, whether on another planet or dimension. They have their own worlds or if they were created based on an existing world, and for those worlds there is some tutorial happening outside the Earth too. He tells her that he has managed to understand that after seeing her attitude. The Potra tries to tell her what he thinks are the monsters that have appeared on Earth, but seeing that she is silent without wanting to answer his doubts, he tells her that he won't say anything more. Kirikiri tells him that he was just saying his own conjectures, so it doesn't matter, but if he tries to get information based on her reactions, she will start acting differently too. He tells her that he understands and thinks that something like that is what happened the other time. He remembers when he asked her what happened to the people who died there and she didn't answer him, but changed her expression. He thinks that she should have warned him on the extra level, out of her good intention. He thinks that Kirikiri will always give him information that will help him, and trying to take advantage of a child's good intention is not good, so he apologizes to her. When they finish eating, they get up from the table and Kirikiri sees how the Prota goes to a doorway. She asks him why he doesn't think about it a little longer, and he asks her if she was talking seriously. She tells him that she will never know if Idalta can become a good partner and tries to tell him a negotiation that he could make with her if he tries to convince her. But the Prota interrupts her, telling her that he has no interest in negotiating with her. He tells her that getting her to calm down is impossible in the first place. So he tells her that he will go and buy an item next time after getting some points. He tells himself about changing his shield for a better one, but he doesn't have enough points to do so. So he will have to get over the 6th floor and get more points. Kirikiri tells him to at least buy a potion. He tells her he has enough and she tells him she doesn't think he has enough. She asks him if he will need many items on the 6th floor and ends up using the remaining points to buy more items. They say goodbye and she tells him to take care of himself. She also tells him that he better come back quickly, although she doubts that this will happen. The Prota wonders how difficult can be the 6th floor, but the answer is given immediately by himself when he realizes that it is something that he has to discover. He arrives to the 6th floor and sees the notification that he must designate the members of his group before entering the 6th stage. He sees that in the part where it says the current members of the group there is only him and there must be 5 people. The Prota realizes that out of nowhere he needs a group of 5 people, and that was crazy. He wonders where he will get people to put it together. Forming a group with a challenger of a different skill level would be impossible, and would only be possible with a challenger from the 6th floor in a difficulty of hell. The Prota tells the system that he is unique in the hell difficulty to begin with, and that, although the system has no conscience, that situation is being too much. Sarcastically, he asks the board if he really thought that 5 people will survive to the 6th floor of hell. It was a mistake in an obvious way, and asks him if that was designed by the gods. since they are the only crazy ones who watch what the challengers do and talk about it all day long. The PROTA, what was he supposed to expect from them? And into his mind comes the memory of Idalta, that he can revive her, but he refuses to do that, and in that comes a notification that the god of adventure was disappointed in him. The PROTA tells the board to shut up and asks him if he watches it all day or what. He imagines the god of adventure as a fat old bald man with a white blanket, and that he was surely a lewd person. A notification pops up telling him that the god of adventure has been very surprised and he is shocked by his thoughts. The PROTA wonders what he is supposed to do about his fate at that point in the tutorial, as he is the one who is to blame for choosing the hell difficulty without thinking about it too. He remembers there was a case where a co-opus player would appear on the 6th floor on the hard difficulty. He thinks about the fact that group play was affected by so many challengers. There are people who worked hard to get there, and some people started discussing weapon or growth decisions. But still everyone died on the 1st floor, so the PROTA didn't understand how come he needed a group there. The members board keeps appearing there, and below is a button where it tells him whether he will enter yes or no. The PROTA thinks that the option to enter alone is a good thing, but he will have to do the work of 5 people and complete it by himself. He falls that it is an easy thing to say, but he is in the difficulty of hell, and doing the work of 5 men would not be easy at all. He thinks that if there were other challengers he could not compare himself with them, as he would definitely be above average, or at least that was what his confidence was telling him. He remembers that Kirikiri told him that he can get a special authority skill because of the specialties that the god of slowness has. If it wasn't for that, he wouldn't have managed to get that authority in the first place. He thinks it's okay, because the god of adventure granted him an authority because he felt nervous that the god of slowness gave him one. The PROTA had never felt that his skills were not enough after getting used to battles. His judgment, creativity, concentration, response, adaptability, reaction speed, perseverance, and tenacity. He had become stronger in every aspect, but still he wondered if he was able to do the job of 5 men in the difficulty of hell. He thinks to test it and presses the button that if he entered, he falls into a room where there is a small fire and a notice welcoming him to the 6th floor. Being in the room, the PROTA quickly details that there is a bonfire and 2 portals. He deduces that one must be to return to the waiting room, and in the other there is a notification asking him if he wants to challenge the test set. He remembers that he had heard in the community that there was a floor like this. They said that the whole floor was connected to a single test. That place was the one they called Bonfire Room. It is a space for team members to meet and discuss tactics to challenge that scenario. Many were interested in that place due to the fact that it was a safe area, and also had a magical campfire. Something especially interesting was the campfire fire, which would never spread or go out. Plus it also does not produce smoke. The PROTA remembers that they said you could even cook if you bought the ingredients from the store menu. There was even a challenger who wanted to stay and live in the campfire room. The PROTA wonders if he should cook something, but tells himself that this is not the time for that and that he'd better cook the next time he's there. He decides to enter the portal where the notification is asking him if he wants to challenge the test set, and he presses the yes button. He falls into a corridor and thinks he is on the 6th floor, although it looks very similar to the corridor on the 1st floor. He walks and realizes that instead of a portal there is a stone door, which has a notification telling him that he cannot leave, and wonders how that door is the exit. At that moment a notification arrives telling him that the test on the 6th floor has already started, and when he approaches he sees another notification of this one written the explanation of that test. Read that 50 years ago, since the cursed priests of the Bahar Church were chased from the pantheon. The church was a cult that revived the dead and turned souls into evil spirits, including Kijas. There were 16 priests. The persecuted ones were able to escape the hunt from the pantheon by taking refuge there, in the center of the White Mountains. The center of the White Mountains was once known as New World in the past. It is said to be a place where a god resided. The priests of the Bahar Church were trying to use the divinity fragments to plunge the continent into nightmares. The PROTA reads a message that says, "O brave warriors, until the holy knights of the pantheon arrive, you are the only ones who can stop them." As he finishes reading it, he thinks about how the brave warriors takes away all the seriousness and makes it sound ridiculous. A notice appears with the conditions to achieve success. The first one says that until the order of the holy knights arrives, the forces of death must be prevented from escaping from the White Mountains. The second one says that the forces of death must be overthrown and the 16 priests must be disposed of. The PROTA tells himself that he must only prevent the forces of death from reaching the stone door. He wonders if he must kill them all, including the priests. He stops thinking when many skeletons appear with capes, skirts, and swords marching at the same pace. The PROTA is surprised by the number of skeletons he sees and realizes that for their march to sound so loud there must be many of them. The PROTA thinks that they do not look very strong as individual opponents, and that if he makes good use of that narrow corridor there would not be too much danger. Although they were many skeletons, he thinks that if the priests are necromancers, then the creation of those skeletons will not stop and they will keep coming one after another. The PROTA thinks that he will have to take care of those guys at a rate of speed exponentially faster than the rate of creation of skeletons. The PROTA remembers why Kirikiri told him that it would take him more time to return and thinks that no doubt that level is above his estimated level to pass for sure. He thinks that the biggest problems will be his stamina and his speed to be able to take care of those skeletons. Besides not being able to clear this for the 3rd session in 2 days, and it could even take him until the 5th session. He spreads his wings as he thinks that because of his size with them he will be able to block the corridor. There will not be a way for them to continue their march towards the stone door. The skeletons are approaching and he is hitting them until he realizes that their weak points are their skulls. If the skulls are not destroyed they continue moving. He also realizes that some skeletons are well equipped with helmets and carved armor. He deduces that those are the commanders, and out of nowhere appear more skeletons with red cloaks and red eyes. The PROTA goes backwards until he reaches the door. He falls into despair when he sees the point he was taken to, and that no matter how many skeletons he kills, they keep coming one after another without end. Even if he wants to kill the priests, so far he had seen no trace of them. After 2 days of constant fighting, the raid to the 6th floor ended as a failure. There is a pause in the story and the PROTA is in a room where there is an egg in the center of a pillow that has a glass capsule around it. There are wires connected to that capsule and around it sounds a melody. When he finishes wiping the capsule, the PROTA comments that he had already finished with the preparations, that he must do other things and needs more time. But if he keeps an eye on the egg, the dragon egg will hatch. Everything was already prepared for after it hatches. The first thing he will do is bathe it in elixir and give it the blessing that will give it a variety of stamina abilities. The dragon will drink diluted elixir and eat ground spiritual byproducts and large worms. The PROTA already had the giant mixer ready for the baby's food. Once it grows up a little, he will give it fairy larvae, because he had learned about magic, and in case the dragon is born and does not accept him as a father, he says that he has already prepared the dragon's heart so it will not feel uncomfortable because of its appearance. Thanks to a person he was able to learn a lot about reptiles. Suddenly he gets a call from Kim Min Hyuk, and when he answers he tells him that he is calling him to say goodbye before he leaves. PROTA tells him that he thought he was just going to be locked up living there, and that he will finally leave. His friend replies that he plans to go out and live a quiet life, to which PROTA replies that he is sure he will make it. His friend tells him that he doesn't think PROTA is going to be running around killing the monsters that appeared on Earth, the Korean server that adopted one of the strongest alarm clocks. PROTA had been one of the pioneers of that server. PROTA asks him that if he were to stay in Korea he would receive some kind of national merit, as he would have a say in political matters too, so they might not let him live a quiet life. The PROTA tells him that, if there was ever a day of the big conference, he would have gone to greet him in person before he left, and his friend replies that he was sick of the big conference, to which the POTRA tells him that he has forgotten that at first it was a pretty fun event. And his friend tells him that it was because he wasn't doing any work, unlike him who had to work very hard. He tells him that he was just standing in a corner hurting himself to raise his resistances, but somehow he did help a lot. The PROTA tells him that it looks like the conference would happen again very soon, and his friend asks him if he was serious. The PROTA asks him if he did not know, and his friend replies that it has been a long time since he stopped managing the civil militia. He asks him if Park Young knows about the meeting, and the PROTA tells him that he thinks so. His friend tells him that by that answer he thinks the meeting will not happen, as the big conference only happens when there is a serious problem in the tutorial. If the information about the big conference was leaked, the civilian militia should be on the move, as Park Young likes to nip problems in the bud. PROTA tells him that then the next big conference will happen sometime after she completes the tutorial. His friend laughs and asks him if anything has changed between him and Park Young. PROTA tells him that things are still the same and asks him why he is curious. His friend tells him that he thought it was time for them to get along, and PROTA tells him that nothing will change as long as he stays locked up where he is. His friend tells him that, If he leaves, the only person he will be able to talk comfortably with Park Young-a is him and that he should help her. The PROTA tells him that now he should be worrying about other people, and his friend tells him that he shouldn't behave like that. He still thinks that the girl likes him. The POTRA tells him that he probably said the same thing to the girl, and his friend says no. Then the PROTA tells him that he will send her a message and check. He asks him if that was okay, and his friend says that he should do whatever he wants. At that, his friend asks him if he really asked her because she was cursing him, and tells him that there are some lines that he should not cross because it seems that he has no common sense. The PROTA laughs, and his friend asks him what is funny, besides asking him if he was drugged. The PROTA tells him that his resistance is too much of a drag to be drugged, and tells him that he will talk to Park Young-a later. His friend tells him that if the big conference were to happen, he could meet the new guy. He asks him if he is still on the 6th floor, and the PROTA tells him yes. His friend asks him if he was not excited, and he tells him that he should not be that excited as there are not many that made it that far. His friend tells him that he should not be that tough as the guy looks like he is good, to which the PROTA replies that no one is as good as he is. His friend tells him that he is really strong, but that the new guy looked very compromising, and asks him if he thinks that a rookie can overcome the 6th floor. The PROTA tells him that being an archer they might not make it, but if they are given some objects they might, since the first 10 floors can be overcome with the right equipment. If they were lucky they could get to the 30v0 floor like the Americans. His friend asks him how strong he was, and the PROTA asks him why he wants to know. He tells him that when he leaves many people will ask him. He asks him again how strong he is compared to a G-rank monster. In the real world, people have ranks of monsters to classify them. In the beginning it was from A to F, S was added recently, and G after that. G-rank monster is a nationwide threat, and there are 4 G-rank monsters currently on Earth. Once a G-rank claims their territory, they don't go away. A G-rank monster named Ochlora took over New York. Then the United States confronted him. At that time, the strongest awakened armies in the world were mobilized. They defeated Ochlora in the end, but there were casualties, including half of the most powerful awakened in the world. Those were the things that were heard from the new ones in the tutorial. Those who were there from the beginning have never seen such monsters. PROTA tells him that based on the information he has about those monsters, he thinks it is enough. His friend thanks him for such a simple answer that feels like he has heard it before. They both laugh and end up talking about the past, from the time they met, the hardships and the funny moments they had lived together. The PROTA tells that he met Kim Min-hyuk a few times during the big conference. But those moments are precious memories for him, since he had been alone in the hardship of hell for all that time. He was one of his few friends and family. Even if his friend leaves, it doesn't change the fact that he can't see him. It just means that he won't be able to contact him through messages. His friend says goodbye, telling him that he will leave first and see him outside. But for the PROTA, that felt like a goodbye forever. He asks him to greet the people outside for him and thinks that he should leave too. He thinks that he was getting worried and leaves a note that says, "Greet Kirikiri for me." Back to reality. The PROTA wakes up from a dream in which he had fallen. Around him there are some marble walls like from Olympus, and he realizes that he had had his first defeat. He had failed to complete the 6th floor, and at the same time, he finished round 3. The 4th round had started and the PROTA wanted to try again, but the chances of completing it were low. He thinks that he had experienced death countless times from the 2nd floor, but he had never felt so defeated as that time. He thinks about how possible it is to complete it, how it is similar to the time he wanted to retire, when he had lost his cousin's skills, that is, when he was at his best, his most powerful stage, and all for losing to a novice player. He thinks that when he returned to that place he regained his main ability, but now his weak back, neck pain and slow reflexes had returned to how he was in his prime. He had become a superhuman as he leveled up, but now he had lost. The PROTA was in a complete defeat. The newly arrived people in the tutorial came with news, and that was that the Chungcheong region of Korea was completely destroyed. All the people in the tutorial and the PROTA were shocked after hearing that news. The challengers were troubled by the news that the new ones brought. Chungcheong had been destroyed, but the areas outside that zone were doing well. Perhaps because things were going relatively well in Korea, according to the news. It seems that they had placed defense lines in the north and south of Chungcheong to prevent the monsters from spreading out of the city. That was not enough to give calm to anyone, but to hear that Korea was relatively well, it was certain that other countries were out of danger. In the 4th session there was an uproar in the tutorial. When the session started, Park Young-a started a war against the old Rep Guild members. The reason why there were signs that they were becoming active again. The PROTA tells himself that he didn't think they would have anything in mind after seeing something so horrible on the day of the big conference, and also since the civilian militia is still active. The war had ended quickly. According to what PROTA had heard, 8 people were purged and Park Young-a had personally blown the brains out of one of them. By that action, the issue of whether she would continue to lead the civil militia became a hotly debated topic. PROTA didn't know what to think, as she could become a brutal killer or a judge acting purely for justice. He thought that as long as she didn't cross the line, he shouldn't meddle. What he did know is that if things became serious, a big conference day would have to start. The PROTA thinks that, if one day of the big conference ends up happening because of her, he will just have to do exactly the same thing he did last time. Think about that. Kim Min-hyuk has also been keeping busy helping new people adjust faster. He created a guide and shared it with most of the community. He also created a system of gifts and exchanges using the auction window. The rule is that any items that cost 7 or 77 points are for individuals, so you should not bid on them. It is a simple rule, but very effective. Helping newcomers is a fact, but it will motivate exchanges between people as well. Until now, the auction window was mainly used for rankers to sell items they don't need cheaply. There wasn't much being traded most of the time. Since there were not enough points, they had to be auctioned at low prices. While Park Young-a was becoming more alert to crimes, Kim Min-hyuk was working to develop an environment where people could communicate easily. He wanted to establish a society and culture in the tutorial. He wanted to make it a pleasant place for people in every way he could. Instead of the few people on the 100th floor, he said that it is more important to concentrate on the environment around the people who will be on the lower floors. According to PROTA, that thought was not wrong because many people were left behind. A way for weak people was the answer that Kim Min-hyuk found. In the past few days, PROTA had not been playing alone. He had his own job. As the 4th session began, the rookies had reached hell difficulty. One had chosen the wrong option while drunk and the other had just waved his hand in the air as if it meant nothing, which seemed stupid to the PROTA, as he thought that his companions in the first session had chosen that level by choice. They wanted to do that level, although the PROTA was the only one to survive. Still, PROTA taught the newbies everything he knew about the difficulty hell, taught them how to avoid, and gave them growth guides of different types. The PROTA was giving them lessons from the community board when he explained that for now the important thing was to overcome the first trap. They had agreed to contact each other when they were in the waiting room and tells them that soon they should receive a message. The rookie who had chosen the hell level as anything was nervous as he was dodging the arrows, as they were very fast and he could not see them. The PROTA asks him what he means by not being able to see them, and the man replies that he had somehow managed to survive when he had fallen by accident, and asks the PROTA what he was supposed to do against something like that. At the end of the day, one of them could not get back and the other had gone crazy. The PROTA was disappointed, as he had gone out of his way to teach them, although deep down he had expected something like that to happen. Stressed by the situation, the PROTA wonders what he is supposed to do to save the people who end up in the hell difficulty. The POTRA explains to the one who had gone crazy to stay waiting in the waiting room. When the waiting time is over, he tells him to try to hold it in front of the portal. The PROTA tells him that he will send him food in the next session, but the last one gave up on challenging him, and the POTRA came to the conclusion that humans are very mentally weak beings. The guy would have to stay 30 days in the portal eating dried meat and water. Then he would stay a few days in the waiting room and then another 30 days in front of the portal. He might have to spend his whole life that way. Kim Min-hyuk was working to bring other challengers from the lower floors to the higher floors, but when it comes to the difficulty hell, it was all in vain. The PROTA thinks that there is nothing more to do and he must walk his own destiny. He arrives at the campfire room and thinks about how the 6th floor must be completed while eating some marshmallows. From his pocket he takes out 3 gems. A pink one which was the birth gem of the goblin Gractus, a purple gem which was the birth gem of the goblin Goros, and lastly the yellow gem was the soul stone of the lizard woman Idalta. The PROTA thinks that, if he uses the ability to summon the deceased, he can get 3 comrades, although he doesn't know if they would work as his comrades. But if he managed to convince them somehow, it might work his plan. He would end up with a team. They could split into 3 teams and could take turns fighting, so they could conserve their stamina and add another member when in danger. Without commander appears, the extra member can go specifically to take care of him. And if the PROTA was alone, he couldn't stop the walking skeleton soldiers while defeating the commander. If all 4 worked together to complete the floor, their plan could work. If the PROTA considered the width of the bridge, the strategy could work. The ability to summon the deceased was definitely useful. It might be believable if he told them that the gods gave it to him to complete the 6th floor. But the part in the indications of that ability where it said that a period of time was set was something that Prota was concerned about. It just meant that when a good amount of time passed, the people he had summoned could disappear. The Prota thinks that more floors will appear where they demand teamwork, even if he completes that floor. At any moment he would run into a wall. Getting temporary mercenaries to get past the 6th floor was not the answer for the Prota, so he considers that, if he keeps thinking about it in the long run, the right answer was to become strong enough to replace 5 people. He thinks about going back and trying not to die, challenging the floors while barely avoiding death, and he will just keep going on and on and on. He thinks about not giving up no matter how many times it takes. The Potra thinks that with that system his levels and skills will grow as long as he keeps challenging the floor. It's different from the real world, where you just destroy your body by working too hard. Since there is a waiting room, there is no reason for him to worry about accumulating fatigue and pain. It is the perfect environment for him to concentrate on his growth. The Prota thinks that for the time being it is best to postpone the floor raid. Even if he uses some tricks, he will only end up hitting a brick wall on the next floor, and in the end, the only way to victory is to concentrate on his growth without rest. A portal opens and he thinks that if he fails he just has to go back to the waiting room. He just has to avoid dying and throws himself into the portal. He spreads his wings and sees all the skeleton troop from the first time. He repeats to himself that as he becomes more proficient, his level and skills will grow as well. The waiting room will allow him to recover completely. If he has a strong enough will, he will manage to climb any wall. The Prota comes to the conclusion that the tutorial world is like an RPG in many ways, and that there is nothing that cannot be achieved with enough effort. He must show them the tenacity and persistence of a gamer, reaching level 20 by now. The 4th session ends and the raid to the 6th floor fails. In the waiting room is a girl with blue hair and purple eyes eating a chocolate bar while reading chat in the community. She reads that someone asks about why she wouldn't listen to him, and they reply that her death is because she didn't listen. The girl says that what she reads is from 8 years ago and she has read all the old stuff. She thinks that the waiting time is boring and she wants to go to the stage already. Her resistances and skill levels don't go up well when she is in the waiting room, and she thinks that Augusty didn't say she had to do it anyway. Currently in the 6th floor challenge of hell difficulty, the girl thinks that by looking at those old messages she can learn more or less a little bit about the history of the Korean servers. She thinks about Augusty and how at first he was treated as a liar, but soon after he ended up as one of the highest rankers and one of the strongest in the tutorial. She thinks about how he really was amazing and that she knew about him before she entered the tutorial. Augusty was the only survivor of the hell difficulty of the Korean server and the strongest challenger. Or at least that's what everyone says about him in the real world. Augusty, or rather, Lee Ho-yi, was a former pro gamer. Tons of reports about his past started to come out, and also tabloids started to be printed about him. Yet the girl knew about him when she saw him on TV while watching her little sister watching him. She was the one who told her that he was a pro gamer. At that time she thought he looked too good to be a pro gamer and should rather be an actor. But she never thought about him again, and now it was ironic that he was her daddy long legs, her guide in that world. That girl had entered the hell difficulty by mistake, but he had given her hope. He was her support, and without him she would have died. She comes out of her thoughts when she gets a notification asking her if she was ready and sees a call from Park Young. She realizes that she was the one who sent him the notification and that it was probably accidental. The girl answers and asks if something had happened, to which Park Young replies no. But that Appa had asked her to say goodbye. She wonders who the heck Appa is and thinks he means Augusty, as she has never called someone Appa before. She thinks about the rest of the community talking comfortably amongst themselves and even cursing each other. She hears Park Young tell her that she is going to get some points on the 61st floor. But the girl is still thinking about who Appa is because she has never heard anyone say that name before, and she starts to feel worried. Park Young reminds her to tell her manager, and the girl thinks that Park Young is a bit abrupt, even a little hostile. She wonders if she called him Appa on purpose and replies to Park Young that if she remembers about her manager. From her mouth she quotes a girl like "you shouldn't meddle" and asks if it's something like that. She opens a portal, takes her bow and arrow, and tells herself that it's time to start the raid. When she enters, she arrives at the campfire room and a notification appears welcoming her to the 6th floor phase. She thinks that Augusty did not teach her everything about that phase. He said that, if she does not die instantly due to lack of knowledge, it was important to know how to acquire and use information. The girl agrees with that thought and remembers that the 6th floor has an endless army of skeletons. She must fight against the priests, that create them. She remembers that there is also a method of holding out until the holy knights arrive there, but it is impossible to hold out against the amount of soldiers coming. She stops thinking and decides to enter the battle. She runs down the corridor and realizes that speed is vital on that floor. She summons a high-level magic stone and a potion of concentrated magic power, uses them by summoning the Fantu skill, and makes herself a kind of magic trap on the floor. Jumps from one end to the other after summoning the Sil-style skill and realizes that using magic to fly there is much easier. Unlike Aujasi, the girl has no wings, but uses positions to be able to fly. The girl decides to set several magic traps and arrives at the beginning of the corridor. She tells herself that she must draw an explosive magic circle in the middle and just memorize the route. She uses her perception ability to see where the skeletons are and realizes that they are far away. She goes through the corridors and starts repeating a pattern. She starts left 3 times, right 2 times, left 6 times, and that's how she memorizes the route. She stands behind a wall and sees the skeletons approaching. She tells herself that it is time to kill, and invokes the ability Data Spill Kion. Her cloak begins to glow and repeats spiritual magic that can make me fly, and give me invisibility. The cloak gives her the ability to move on the roof, and that's how she dodges the skeletons. The girl reaches the 16 priests and sees how a skeleton is transformed. She thinks that they will attack her the moment they see her, and at most she will last 6 seconds. That is her limit. So she starts shooting arrows from her bow that, thanks to her good aim, reach directly to the skull of a priest. She invokes the battle concentration skill and starts shooting arrows that fall to 3 priests. Suddenly one of them takes out from each hand 2 fireballs, and the ones she had not been able to attack come closer to scare her. She invokes the Fantalarka skill and is teleported to the starting place where she had made a magic portal. She thinks that she was lucky to escape, but she has used a lot of high-level magic in a short time and she is running in the fumes there. However, she thinks she has done well that time and lies down on the ground because of how exhausted she is. But she tells herself that her story of survival in the difficulty of hell will have to continue. It is the 8th day of the 5th session in the history of POTRA. He gets the welcome notification again about the 6th floor phase and how the test was about to start. He thinks that it will be at least 2 hours before the skeleton soldiers show up. He thinks that he is on a path that only wastes his time and wonders if he should raise his resistances. But he thinks that it is better not to do it since he is not guaranteed that he will be able to heal by the time of the battle. He can't use potions every time either. He wonders if he should do some exercise and starts to do a series of burpees. That series of exercises makes him a little tired, and he realizes that it was being more difficult than he thought, because he had stopped exercising since his body surpassed that of a non-normal human. He thinks that climbing the resistances is like running in the same place, so doing some basic exercise can be effective. However, he is forced to stop at the moment when he hears the skeletons approaching, so he says to himself that it is time to work. He cuts off the skulls of the skeletons that are approaching him because that is how they stop walking. He receives a notification telling him that he has leveled up. His strength has increased by 1 point, as well as his stamina, his magic power, the shield arts skill, and the melee skill. But another notification appears telling him that he had failed the 6th floor test. Remember how someone once asked a muscular, blonde-haired, high-ranking player of a popular RPG game if it didn't get boring to hunt every day? The player answered his question with another question. He asked him if living gets boring, and when he got no answer, the player started to relate that life is a routine. He found himself doing what he liked every day, and it didn't get boring. The man tells him that's a smart answer. The PROTA remembers that he did not become a professional player because he liked a specific game, but because he liked to win, so he concentrated on a single game to become a professional. That is why he did not get bored of playing the same game, but he would like to ask that high-ranking player how he did not get bored. The PROTA keeps cutting heads while fighting with the tiredness of seeing the faces of the skeletons, the sounds they made, how they move their swords the same way every time, and feeling pain for those rusty swords. He says he is getting tired, but he must go on, because there are still good things about it. Swinging his sword had become ingrained in his body, as swinging his sword the same way in the same situations so many times had caused him to develop a sword style that he had become familiar with, which had caused his sword skill to increase. A notification appeared telling him that he had achieved level 10 in basic sword skills, and had also moved up to level 7 in basic shield arts. But, even so, the 6th floor was not getting any easier, and again a notification appears telling him that he had failed the 6th floor test. The POTRA thinks about how as he leveled up through concentration in combat, his cognition also grew faster as a result. He has the memory of when he got the notification that he had leveled up to level 13 in battle concentration. He thinks about how his opponent's movements had become slower, but he had improved to the point where it seems like time stood still. He can only get to that level of concentration for a brief moment. But he has many opportunities to grow, and he is reminded of it by how he has leveled up in different areas. The PROTA makes a war cry that due to its intensity rises to level 2. That cry stuns the skeletons, and it is remembered that, in most games, tank characters have that ability. As a result, their combat value will increase a little, although it is not certain how much. He arrives at the priests and they tell him that death will fall upon him. They point out to him an Azd, who is a knight of death, and tell him that he will be the one who will take him to rest eternally. The bosses began to appear a little further inside. At first they had deceived the PROTA, making him believe that this knight was the final boss. But when he realizes that it is not so, he insults them and stabs that knight. A notification that he had failed the test of the 6th floor appears again. In the middle of PROTA's raid, a fort appeared on the road that made him slow down a bit. It was the skeletons that appeared even stronger on his way, and as a result, no matter which way PROTA went, the salts would still come and open the stone door. He wonders in frustration what he should do, for giving up is not an option. The PROTA manages to hold out for up to 13 days, but the knights did not appear. And when he ran out of options, he could not continue. It was not about strength but lack of stamina. So before the skeletons reached the stone door by the other way, the PROTA had to go complete the phase, being the best option, but the most difficult. The PROTA thinks that whatever he does, he must concentrate on his growth, attack the skeletons, and he receives notifications that he has reached level 8 of resistance. He has reached level 4 of pain and level 9 of resistance to paralysis. Even his resistances have increased. After the knight condemns him to death, he receives a notification that he has leveled up, and in each of his virtues he has increased 1 point. He arrives at the waiting room, and after getting the ability of magic circuits, it became possible to use the magic power that was inside him. Although it had cost a lot to understand the changes that circulated in his body by the magic power. With hard work he got that power in his hands, but only in a small amount. He realized that if he sent the magic power to his muscles, he had access to explosive physical strength. Practicing several times, the PROTA managed to pass that magic power to his sword, and when he did that, it looked like a blue lightsaber. When that happened, the PROTA liked to call himself the Josian Sword Master, but as the magic power could end, and he had to find some kind of method for that. Returning to battle with the skeletons, one of them exclaims to the servant of a false god, "Witness the strength of the great abyss. The unique and absolute being in that reality will bring salvation to that irrational world." The skeleton sees the PROTA and tells him that he is brave but foolish, that he had taken the wrong path, and that Kijas would send him to his death. Stabs him, and the PROTA appears again in the waiting room lying on the floor with the notification that he had failed the 6th floor test. It goes back to the part of the story where the PROTA is in a room where there is a capsule that protects a dragon egg. The PROTA is finishing the grimoire of dragon use. He thinks about how crazy it is that dragons have not had a grimoire, because they are a magical race and they learn magic naturally as they grow. Plus they do not lose their memories no matter how much time passes. They never had the need for education or grimoires where to point and store all the magic. He complains out loud about how annoying a dragon race is and quickly clarifies to the draggy egg that he wasn't talking about him. He stares at him and thinks that, even though dragons don't need magical education, if he can teach him something, the dragon's learning will be faster. He thinks that he will have to teach him high-level magic required for the raid on the 61st floor, because there is no time for him to learn everything by himself in a natural way. The PROTA thinks about the things he wrote in the Grimorium. Because he had avoided putting things that a dragon wouldn't need, he filled the notebook with chants and internal magic power. He comes out of his thoughts when he gets a message from Park Yoonga, 90th floor, asking him about his report. He quickly writes her hell difficulty, 60th floor, residential district, all clear, and sends the message. He thinks about if there is any reason why every month he has to report like that and asks her if she is not tired of those reports. She asks him if he wasn't tired of her having to remind him every month. He tells her that he gets a message from her about it because he is always late, so he asks her the reason for her delays. He thinks that she is in a bad mood and that it will be better just to let that brush of words pass. The PROTA apologizes to Park Yoonga and tells him that he just tries not to get too specific on how much time has been going on. and that he likewise tries not to look too much at the messages that come to him, as it seems he has been in there for a long time and feels he may become mentally ill again. He tells her that his medications are not working anymore, but it is all a lie. She apologizes to him and tells him that she did not know he felt that way. Tells him that he should not write her monthly reports anymore and will ask a certain person when she needs to hear from him. The PROTA thinks that everything went as planned and it was time to get rid of another annoying thing. He asks Park Young-a if he can pass her a message while he is firing Lee Yeon-hee, as he will go to the 61st floor. She asks him what he will do there, and he tells her that he has been using too many points, so he should get more. She asks him what he wants her to tell her, and he proceeds to tell her. He asks her not to forget to tell the administrator and thinks of Kurikri. But Park Young-a tells him that it would be better if that is something that comes out of his mouth. She asks him if the girl is not on the 60th floor, and he says yes. Park Young-a tells him that the growth of the blue-haired girl and the bow had reached a safe point. He tells her that Lee Yeon-hee managed to adapt well to the 6th floor, and it was praise that she was worried about. He tells the PROTA that it may take some time, but that girl would come to a discovery very soon. He tells her that that girl has talent, not as much as him, but she has. Park Young-a tells her that to overcome the weakness of an archer, Lee Yeon-hee learned from enchanting magic. Those abilities can be activated by giving magic power while saying some incantation like Data Spill Kion. It is not very powerful and not very modifiable, but it is easy to use and has a short casting time. PROTA tells him that it is easy to learn as well. Originally it was called half-baked magic. However, things have gotten to the point where it is harder to find a traditional mage as opposed to an enchanter mage. Besides that, it is basically a fact that the archer-enchanter hybrid is powerful. PROTA thinks internally that is why he had agreed and gave him his support. To change the subject, the PROTA comments to Park Young-a that he had heard that something was going to happen soon. He asks her how true it is, and she tells him that, yes it is. He tells her that people have been talking about it. Although it is not something confirmed yet, she will have to look more into it. He comments that it would be good if it was a big conference day, as anything else would be upsetting. She tells him that if it is a big conference day she would not leave him alone. In an annoyed tone she tells him that the civilian militia has been slacking off a lot and he is shocked by what he hears. He tells her that she is killing them with so much nagging, and the civilian militia guys had been complaining to him for several days now. She asks him about who and he writes down their names in a message he passes them. He thinks he is sorry, but he can't afford to die. Park Young-a tells her that Kim Min-hyuk was gone too, and the PROTA tells her that now she will have to play the role of the mother for now too. She is dumbfounded by what she hears and tells him that she can't do that. The PROTA thinks about how he doesn't think they can replace Kim Min-hyuk because Park Young-a doesn't trust anyone anymore. He thinks about how he should stop him when he said he wanted a divorce, and she tells him that no one expected him to leave the moment he got that deal. They hang up the call, and the PROTA thinks about how ironic it is that the person giving dating advice was the same person who ended up in a divorce and leaving out of the game. The PROTA walks around the room a bit and thinks back to the grimoire, that what he had written down should be enough, but that anyway after the dragon hatches he should continue to find out more information about magic. He goes over to see the egg and wonders what color the dragon will be, as they used to be black, gold or red. He tells her to watch the house while he goes to get some money. He summons some guards to take care of the egg because that baby and the PROTA were the only ones on that floor and he didn't want to leave him alone. His clone appears and tells the PROTA that he is a main body bastard. He ignores him and gives him his task. The clone tells him that if he remembers that he is in a temporary residence and asks him to put him as the main body. The PROTA denies and thinks that even though that clone is created based on him, he was somewhat weak and malevolent. The clone reminds him that he can read his mind and asks him about who he was calling weak. The PROTA tells him that he will know if anything happens to the egg. The clone asks him not to take his existence lightly, but the PROTA ignores him and bids him farewell. The PROTA had created that clone to complete the 61st floor, but unfortunately he was unable to complete that floor and his clone had become useless. But he used it to guard his house. The chapter begins with a story in the Uber Empire. Having received power from the spirit of light, Milenio lit the sun, and the caster Frid summoned the spirit of darkness and created the night. And if the first gave vitality, then Frid gave peace. When Milenio illuminated the world with warm light, Frid cast a shadow on the world in which to hide from the light and heat. That's how the world, the empire of Yubera, were created by their hands. Today's imperial family of Millenio, as well as archdukes Fried, noble and beautiful, capable of controlling spirits, are the only ones in this empire. We see a huge kingdom, buildings, the architecture of which impresses with its small patterns. The weather is sunny, lots of greenery. Everything is blooming, everything is green. It is light inside the palace, the light passes through the windows. There are a lot of plants inside the rooms, everything is done in green and brown tones. A girl with light, golden hair and bright blue eyes is sitting in the hall. She is dressed in a blue uniform, with a bow tied on her hair. She's sitting in a chair, reading a book, thinking out loud. It's not even funny that they're the only ones. Her name is Dorothea Millenio. She is the princess of the Uber Empire. The boy approaches her and calls her Dorothy. She doesn't respond, so the boy keeps calling her. She gets annoyed with this, eventually tells him not to make noise. She called him Ray. After the words, she gets up and goes somewhere. The boy sees and does not understand where she is moving. He follows her around, asking for forgiveness. He asks if he is too noisy. He asks her not to be angry because he will be quiet. Dorothy reflects on what is so annoying around her right now. He doesn't even know how to put on airs. She calls him so pathetic. The boy's name is Raymond Millenio. He is a smiling, sympathetic boy with the same light, golden hair, and bright blue eyes. He still follows her around, offering to go together. He is the prince of the Uber Empire and Dorothy's obnoxious older brother. Dorothea looks at him with displeasure and annoyance. She tells the story that, to be more precise, he is the true heir, who once already died at the hands of Dorothy. We see a picture where they are already adults. Dorothy with a sword and in bloody clothes stands in front of Raymond, lying on the floor and bleeding. So, it turns out that now this is her second life, the last chance given to her, who lived her life as a tyrant, and she won't repeat the same regrets a second time. We see Dorothy bent down and sitting on her knees. Her hands are tied from behind and everything is red, resembling blood. The purpose of this life of hers is as follows: to live in a kind way. That's the lesson she learned from her past life. Good deeds are rewarded with happiness, and you pay for bad ones with misfortune. And then she was evil. She killed the crown prince and then seized the imperial throne of Yubera. She destroyed all the objectionable, and granted wealth and power to the pleasing. However, when she got everything, only the end was waiting for her. The one she loved hated her and chose death. And the people with whom she shared her power strangled her. People pointed at her, calling her a tyrant, and their anger burned down her palace and brought her to her death. It is true that such a life lesson is enough for her, and then she gladly accepted death. She wakes up, eyes and hears various affectionate words. She does not understand, they tell her, asking a rhetorical question, and how it is possible to be such a beauty. She doesn't understand what they're talking about right now. She is called Princess Dorothea. She was reborn into a princess, and we see her now as a baby, and she is really beautiful from birth. She, Dorothea Millenio, who kept the whole empire in fear, found a second life. Back to the present, when Raymond annoys Dorothy, she thinks that, right, maybe it was just a lesson for her to live right. A chance to turn back her life filled with evil and regrets. The murder of Ray and the seizure of the throne is the true birth of the tyrant Dorothea Millenio, and the beginning of all regrets. So she can't kill him again. She couldn't hate him, and no matter what he did, she would tolerate it. Raymond lovingly calls her by name and climbs up to her to hug. He asks if she is reading a difficult book again. It seems that their Dorothy is a real genius. He says that Dorothy is so small and cute. He wonders how she can also be so smart. Meanwhile, in Dorothy's head there is a desire to just kill him. She asks him to let her in. He kisses her on the cheeks and says that his Dorothy is so cute that it's already creepy. It is clear that Dorothy does not like it. She is not so tactile. She still asks to let her in. She reflects that she has never loved Ray. She tells him to teach the history of Yubera better himself. He shirks, saying that he's not as smart as she is, Dorothy. He has nothing but flowers and butterflies in his head. He asks with a big smile if she is bored to sit all day. Dorothy thinks he got more than she did just because he was born a prince. He invites her to go out to play. She is surprised that he is so peaceful, and replies that he will not go. If he wants to go, then let him go alone. He won't let up and says that he wants to play with her, Dorothy. A maid comes and tells Her Highness the Prince that it is impossible to distract the princess during her studies. He was sad. The maid sees the book in Dorothy's hands and, surprised, asks if she is already learning the history of Yubera. She bends down to look and says it looks like it's about the spirit of light. The maid then asks if she knows that the spirit stone that the first emperor owned was lost in the time of Teresa. Dorothy calls the maid a wet nurse and says that she was mistaken. because the light spirit stone disappeared in the time of Kors, and after all, there is almost 100 years difference between Kors and Nerja. The maid was already confused. In the background, the brother is delighted that Dorothy is so cool. The nurse asks if she has learned everything about the Millenio family. How can she be so smart? Dorothy is sorry and thinks that it looks like she should have pretended that she didn't know. The maid declares that His Majesty the Emperor is simply obliged to hear about her knowledge. Dorothy is alarmed by such a proposal and, turning to the nurse, says that there is no need to report to His Majesty, the Emperor Karnan Millenio. In other words, her father, the children are his copy. For Dorothy, the word father sounds like something far away, as if in a foreign language. She roughly understands how it can be translated, but does not feel the intonation and cannot convey its clear feeling. Of course, they are connected by blood, but it doesn't matter to her. After all, she could not inherit the right of Millenio. Her mother, Empress Alice, died as soon as she was born, because Karnan was indifferent to her, who was born at the expense of the life of his beloved wife, before she tried everything possible so that he noticed her. One day she fell right in front of his eyes, demonstrated her intelligence, tried her best to surpass Ray. She reaches out to her father, but he only removes her helping hand, judging and hating looking at her. He didn't look in her direction until the very end. But with Ray it was different. He didn't have to do anything to receive gifts from Karnan and have lunch together. He could ask Karnan an infinite number of questions and smile. But why did he love Ray more, who only knew how to smile stupidly and play in the sandbox? Why did he never look in her direction, even though she tried much harder? She is angry, gritting her teeth, why he did not choose her. She understands that she cannot tolerate Raymond. She hates him so much. A glass falls on the floor and shatters. She ended up attacking Ray. She is stopped by servants. She could only calm down when she tortured him properly and took away his things. The father, with a hateful look, gives the order to lock Dorothy in the room for a month. And the further, the more their relationship with Karnan resembled a diabolical vicious circle. The princess is sitting in her room, hugging a pillow, sobbing alone. She longed for love, but her life was too worthless for that. As if she wanted to reach the beautiful moon with her hands. Her love remained one-sided and did not reach him. That's how the seeds of evil were imbued with anger and guilt and sprouted. She was jealous and envious. He went over their heads and took away to satisfy his thirst. That's how all this gave birth to the tyrant Dorothea Millenio. Again, going back to the present, Dorothy, still reading the book, reflects that, of course, what difference does it make now? What were the reasons there? After all, she has now realized that it is useless to shift her own sins to others. It's just that her whole fault is that she doesn't evoke enough feelings of love. It's all right now, because she doesn't have any more regrets about Karnan. On the contrary, it's not bad to live like this without seeing a single shadow. Yes, and it will be more convenient to live this way, since she wants to be kind. All this time, while Dorothy is thinking what to read to her, the nurse is standing next to him and thinks that the Emperor will definitely be happy to see the princess. She feels sorry. The weather is fine outside. Dorothy is walking in the park. The nurse suggests that she take a walk in that direction today to unwind a little. The servant points to a garden surrounded by a fence and full of all sorts of plants and greenery. The princess looks and assumes that this is Alice's homeland. This is a garden created by Karnan for his wife Alice, who misses her homeland. She also often went there before her rebirth, but had not visited it for a long time. She doesn't understand why the maid suddenly suggested going there. While they were arriving, a servant greets their Majesty the Emperor. Dorothy turns around and sees her father. It is clear from him that he is also not happy to see the princess. He looks at her with a frown. Dorothy immediately becomes alert and wonders if she has already committed a stupid act. No worse than Ray. If she was impolite, maybe she has already made some mistake. What should she say? Finally, the canon asks the question, who are they that dared to enter Alice's garden? And then the princess realizes that yes, that's right, what else could she expect? And she was going to live this life in a kind way. Karnan asks who they are, since they dared to enter Alice's garden. The servant tells him that this is Princess Dorothea Millenio. He thinks about it, brings his hand to his chin and quietly says that it's crazy. Dorothy hears and repeats his phrase in her head. He looks at her haughtily and reproaches her for not even being able to greet him properly. Then he asks if she hasn't been taught that. Dorothy notices in her head that this is true, because she did not have parents who would teach her. The servant in a panic says that there is no way for His Majesty. She claims that the princess is very smart and exceptional. Karnan replies that he doubts, because for him she looks like a small and impudent girl. The nurse tries her best to justify Dorothy, saying that it's probably only because the princess is surprised to meet him for the first time. because she shines in etiquette classes at the palace. Then he turns to Dorothy with a question, isn't that right? Dorothy sighs, takes a step towards Karnan, bows her head and body slightly, while holding the hem of her dress with both hands. She greets His Majesty the Emperor Millenio very politely. The Emperor asks her how old she is. The princess, still bowing, replies that she is turning 8 this year. He continues the interrogation, asking what is her such exclusivity. She, raising her head, says that this is just an exaggeration from the nurse. There is nothing exceptional about her. The nurse abruptly interrupts them, saying that as His Majesty sees, the princess is modest and perceptive beyond her years, and she has already learned the entire imperial pedigree. The princess is annoyed because there is absolutely no help from the maid. The Emperor bows after her words. He asks if it is true that she has learned the lineage of the Millenio family. Then he says testingly that if it's true, then let him tell. The princess confidently replies that for sure the Emperor is already aware of the palace pedigree. Is there really something unknown to him in the pedigree of the Millenio family? He aggressively asks if she really decided to check on him. The maid stands silently and awkwardly between them. The princess replies that it seems that it is he, His Majesty, who is testing her. What is the use of her telling the family tree here? He also does not let up and asks, so she resists the Emperor's order. In the eyes of the nurse, it looks like a den of wild animals. The princess finally says that she is only trying to save His Majesty's time. It is true that he is so busy that he has never seen her since her birth. The Emperor, folding his arms at his chest, says that, therefore, she will tell the pedigree only when it will benefit her. Dorothy replies that she just doesn't want to waste her and his time. The Emperor thinks about it and finally says that since the words of the nurse are true, then in that case, he asks Dorothea Millenio to say if there is something she would like to tell. Dorothy is surprised. She does not understand. To say what she wants. For what? Because in her memory Karnan has never said anything like that to her. She suspects he's up to something. She's still silent. She reflects that before rebirth she would have jumped for joy. But, unfortunately, she does not need anything from him now. She alone can't just keep silent. She eventually asks in this case to make her the best wine under her name. She decided to ask for something that could play into her hands in the future. The Emperor immediately became gloomy. He turns to the nurse and asks what she is teaching the child here. Is it appropriate for a child of this age to say such a thing? She makes excuses that she never talked about alcohol in front of the princess. Then the princess intervenes and says that it wasn't the nurse who taught her. She read about it in a book called Portrait of Bablua. She says that there is a scene where Bablua and his beloved drank old wine, described by the author as something very refined. Therefore, out of curiosity, she wanted to try a good wine at least once. The Emperor is surprised by this answer, because such a young girl reads such a difficult portrait of Bablua. He thinks about it and finally agrees, saying that as she wants, a fine wine bearing her name will be prepared. Then he sets a condition that if she makes a mistake at least once, he will sentence her nurse, who lied to him, to death. He gives the order to tell the family tree of the imperial family. She bows her head and reflects that maybe she inherited her tyrant nature from her father. She finally says that it is good and then she will start with the first ancestors on the direct branch of Millenio. And yet she decided to be kind, so the nurse's life needs to be saved. After this incident, the nurse expected that the Emperor would be interested in Dorothy, but Karnan never visited her. The servant calls her poor thing, and yet the Emperor is the father of the princess. She can't come to her because of her huge employment. From what she heard, the princess only mentally asks the servant to stop, because Karnan is not one of those. The nurse was upset every time, but, frankly, she can only be grateful for it. After all, her mood deteriorates when she sees the Emperor, and for a prosperous life, it is best to avoid sources of bad mood. In a previous life, she would have gone out of her way just to show her best side than Ray. And surely Karnan would have punished her several times already. She reflects on what a fool she was because she amused herself with useless illusions, and she herself was upset. But now she realized everything. She is reading a book in the garden and thinking about everything. A wet nurse is standing next to her. For the sake of her well-being, it's better to just do nothing. And as soon as she decides to do something, she will only cause his anger and discontent. So, she is pulled out of her thoughts by Ray's kind question. Where is Dorothy? She hears, her mood immediately deteriorates. The servant asks the prince what brought him here. He asks if Dorothy is here. The princess immediately runs away with a request that the nurse say that she is not there. The servant doubts what to say to him and then she herself wonders where she is. Ray says that she wanted to show the princess how to handle the spirit of light. Dorothy, who hid behind a pillar, does not understand why she should watch him control the spirit of light. Did he decide to laugh at her, which already infuriates her? The spirit of light is called a blessing that is available only to the Millennial family, but this is just an old story. We see how Ray shows in front of the nurse how he can control the petals in the air, directing them in different directions so that what kind of image comes out of it. The power of the Millennial family, which once lit the sun, has completely weakened, and now only small lights can be lit with its help. And over time, those who can't control spirits at all, such as her, began to be born in the Millennial family. The princess who can't summon a single spirit, Dorothea Millennial, that's how she was completely excluded from this tradition. So there was another reason why neither people nor Karnon liked her. So she decided to go against the gods and hated Ray even more. What is the use of a pathetic spirit of light, a tiny firefly that retains its influence only thanks to a thin thread of history? Therefore, she took away this influence from him, ascended the throne on her own and put an end to the era of legends. So she proclaimed the era of people, raising a bloody sword to the sky. But, in the end, everything turned out to be a failure. After all, she was executed, called a tyrant, just a little after the seizure of power. Maybe, indeed, it is the spirits that determine the future emperor and her inglorious end. Only the punishment that the legend brought down on the head of the princess who showed excessive impudence. Of course, it doesn't matter now. She sits and thinks when this little bastard who talks to the wet nurse will leave. He asks again if she doesn't know exactly where Dorothy is, to which the nurse regretfully says that she doesn't know for sure. The prince is sad because a friend came to him and he wanted to introduce them. Dorothy, who hears all this, assumes that it is probably some kind of Ray's age, from whom there is no less noise. She decided to leave Ray to the wet nurse, and she'd better go to sleep. She goes and thinks that if she turns here, it will be difficult to get to her room unnoticed from Ray. The main thing is not to get caught. She turns the corner and runs into another boy with dark hair. Dorothy falls from the collision, dropping the book. The boy immediately apologizes and asks if she was hurt badly. She looks up and immediately blushes. She thinks and does not understand what he is doing here because it is impossible. The man she loved more than anyone in the world before rebirth. A phrase pops up in her head asking her to remember only one thing, that her greed ruined him. And then the picture where he is already dead. He was a man who hated her more than life. Then we see a picture where she, seeing the body of her lover, cries and rushes to him. That's right, how can she forget him? Because he was her love, her breath, her eternity. Back to reality. The boy asks Dorothy if she is okay. He holds out his hand to her and asks if she can get up. Since the day of her return, she had not forgotten about him for a second. She gets up hot with tears in her eyes and calls him by the name Theon. The boy looks at her in surprise and says that he really apologizes, whether it hurts her very much. Dorothy is sitting with her face in her hands. He looks at the dress and says that, wow, and the clothes are very dirty. He says it's his fault for not being attentive enough. He holds out a handkerchief and asks for a start to take at least this. He worries and asks again if she has twisted her leg, if she can walk, or if it's better for him to call someone. She says emotionally that she wanted to see him so much. The boy thinks that, it turns out, he heard everything correctly. Does she really know him? He does not understand. She continues to cry, tears flow like a stream. She wipes everything with this handkerchief. He reflects that something else is much more important now. He asks her not to cry, otherwise her eyes will swell. He wipes the tears from Dorothy's face with his fingers. Dorothy's heart is pounding wildly, because the one who turned away and left her is now next to her, so beautifully alive, and this is not a dream. She starts crying even more. Maybe just because he's alive means she's done her duty in this life. He smiles and tells her that she is smart, someone who may well be the cause of her rebirth. Ray is coming, calling Dorothy. He asks if she really hurt herself, if everything is all right. He is very worried. He runs straight to her still with questions about what happened. He sees a bruise on her knee and a crumpled, dirty dress. She, still with tears in her eyes, replies that nothing terrible has happened. He has nothing to worry about. Ray pounces on Theon, grabs his shoulder and asks if Dorothy is crying because of him. Theon sadly replies that it is possible. He lowers his gaze and head and continues to say that it looks like it is and asks for forgiveness. Ray gets angry and calls Theon a real scoundrel. He shouts to him that he thought they could become good friends, and that Dorothy had never cried so much for anyone before. Then he asks what he did to Dorothy. Theon is trying to justify himself to His Highness Raymond. Then Dorothy intervenes and asks Ray to stop, because she wasn't crying because of Theon. He shrugs off that she just got something in her eye. She says that some kind of speck got caught, so the eye got sick. He nervously asks if everything is okay then now. She replies that everything is fine and at the same time thinks that she did not expect that the day would come when she would gratefully think what a fool Ray is. Ray is worried and finally calms down. What a relief. He asks what happened to the knee wound then. She replies that it is shallow, and it will heal in a moment. Theon on the sidelines realizes that this is a princess, and that she also covered his rudeness in front of his brother. But he can't meet the princess before. He wonders what kind of expression was on her face when she first saw him. Ray turns to Theon and sincerely apologizes for having misunderstood everything. Theon smiles and says it's nothing, because he really was to blame. Ray takes him by the shoulder and they stand in front of Dorothy. The prince says with joy that he will present him properly, since he had the chance. He calls him his new friend in front of Dorothy. Theon worships and says he was rude the first time they met. Dorothy realizes that she was going to be introduced to Theon. He takes Dorothy's pen, introduces Theon to Frid, and kisses her hand. Dorothy blushes and thinks that this is their new beginning. There is no history between them. If she forgets about her thirst for love and breaks out of the shackles of the failures of the past days, if her love is something more for Theon, maybe then he will look at her in this life. She wanted to say something to him with joy, but then someone turns to Theon and says that she wanted to go together, so why did he go alone? Dorothy knows this voice. She turns around and recognizes the girl as Theon's first and last love. In front of them is a girl with soft pink, long hair in a red sundress. Her name is Julia de Lavigny. Because of the agreements between the families and her stubbornness, Theon had no choice but to marry Dorothy, but he loved only Julia until his death. These two had been close since childhood and shared a huge affection, and their relationship was so special that two perfectly matching puzzles between which she, Dorothy, could not squeeze through. After all, that was her life. She longed for Carnon's love, but she couldn't get it. She longed for Theon's love, but he didn't give it to Dorothy either. The life of someone who didn't deserve love. Even after marrying her, Theon was always looking for Julia. The dozens of letters he and Julia exchanged behind her back filled with expectation, an expression he never showed Dorothy. She prayed that Julia would disappear. No, she wished that she would die and could not be with him. And when a loyal servant with a solid track record brought the news of Julia's death, she was very happy, flattering herself with illusions that now Theon would come to her. But he escaped from her embrace, although he had to choose death, and he went to where Julia was. His death was caused only by her greed. Her selfish love killed him. Can she call it love? This feeling in her chest, which seems to be tearing into pieces. The boys switch to Julia. Ray informs that Julia has come. Theon says that he asked her to wait for him. Julia replies that she was so bored. Ray introduces Julia de Lavigny to Dorothy and says that she came with Theon from the Duchy of Phrygia. Julia greets Princess Dorothy. She replies to her only a short hello. She continues to think that these two are together even in this life. She wonders what kind of expression she has on her face now. For sure she is filled with this feeling, so it looks unpleasant. She says she remembered that she had things to do, so he will go to the room. Ray asks Dorothy if she will play with them, but she just leaves without answering. Ray doesn't understand what's wrong with her all of a sudden. Theon and Julia also look at each other uncomprehendingly. She goes to her room. Of course, the prince who died by her hand, the beloved who chose death to get rid of her, and his innocently executed beloved, she has no place among them. She hurriedly goes to her room with tears in her eyes from such a terrible confession of herself. The servant asks if she wants to play with her friends. Dorothy, lying in an empty dark room, replies that she does not want to because she is tired. The servant obeys and says that then nothing can be done. Let him rest, and she will wake Dorothy before dinner. The servant leaves. Dorothy lies holding Theon's name handkerchief in her hand, with his name embroidered on the edge of the material. She hugs this handkerchief tightly to herself and cries bitterly. It's a clear day outside. The sun is shining brightly. There are no clouds in the sky. In the palace sits a smart Dorothy reading a book. In the background, someone is walking back and forth quickly and loudly. Dorothy gets annoyed, closes the book, and asks Ray if he can't sit still. He replies that he is so worried, because today he will officially become the crown prince. She says that's right, she will become the crown prince of Ubera. This is a very important role. He says that this makes it even more scary. He turns to Dorothy and asks if he looks like the crown prince. Dorothy looks at Ray and sees in him only a cute puppy who whines with all his appearance. She replies that no, he looks like a fool today too. He is sad and asks if this is really true. Dorothy asks him to do something with his face first. He asks how to do it with his face. He squeezes his cheeks with his palms and asks if it is necessary. Dorothy thinks that this hopeless fool should run the empire. She has a lot of worries. Ray says that it would be nice if he did not become the heir, but Dorothy, she stiffens and clutches the book. He continues to argue that for sure she would not have trembled, but proudly passed the ceremony, because she is smarter than him, More talented, he is sure that she would have become an excellent empress. Dorothy only replies that she doesn't know how to summon spirits, so she can't. The one with a smile and actively says that he knows she will also soon be able to summon spirits. Who, if not the clever Dorothy, to summon them? This carefree simplicity of his is like poison to Dorothy. She thinks that he is behaving this way only because he does not know anything and will gradually understand everything over time. He will understand the full weight of carelessly thrown words. Ray asks her if she could wish him luck once. She answers with a question, why would she do that? He begs her because if his Dorothy wishes him luck, he is sure that he will succeed perfectly. Dorothy only replies with displeasure that he just failed. He is upset. He says that Dorothy is so cold. He asks to hug his brother just once. Dorothy only indifferently tries to leave, to hide somewhere from him. She only ignores all his requests and supplications. The servant informs that Ray will need to enter soon, which makes him even more worried. The ceremony of handing over the crown is an event when the next successor of the emperor is named. It can be considered one of the main events in the empire. But if you think about it, she didn't notice it before, but now everything seems very modest to her. She looks around and concludes in her head that Carnon is not as vain as he seems. But she still doubts, maybe she's just a spender. She begins to remember something, which in childhood is for sure. Here they announce that His Majesty the Emperor is entering. Even this event seemed luxurious to Dorothy. The Emperor begins his monologue, saying that the whole empire will be illuminated by the benevolent light of Millennium. Now Dorothy has stopped experiencing any emotions. She looks at the scenery and thinks that there must be a missing spiritual stone in this scepter. She thinks and reflects that a fragment of that stone was found. Right before the execution she heard something similar, but does not remember what exactly. The monologue continues in the background. The princess continues to think that it doesn't matter, it's nothing to do with her now anyway. They announce that they will now proceed to the ceremony. The door opens with a creak. Ray enters, smiling and confident. Dorothy looks and hopes that he will not make a mistake. Ray catches her eye and immediately smiles broadly. Dorothy raises her index finger in a sign of prohibition. She thinks, why did he make such a stupid face? She tries to tell him to look ahead and walk properly. He sees and just nods his head. Dorothy even more does not understand why he nods his head. Is he really a fool? Suddenly, all the spirits flock to her. She tries to make it clear to Ray that he normally controls the spirits. She believes that now such a fool becomes the crown prince. She would not have made such a mistake. A large crown is put on Ray. Dorothy looks and comes to the conclusion that she has no right to such thoughts, but at least it would be better if a real hero became the emperor this time. The ceremony continues. Numerous guests congratulate the crown prince on the event. The emperor walks in front with the crown prince, and Dorothy walks alone behind them. Everything that is said to them is a sign of congratulations. The princess does not hear. She reflects on her own that for her the surname Millennium is like a curse. The woman turns her attention and looks at Dorothy and says that over time she increasingly resembles the late empress. The other agrees and says that she really is a complete copy of her in her youth. The fact that Dorothy must always resist such situations, and also, the emperor replies to the woman that they are talking utter nonsense. They only ask him for forgiveness for their words and for their rudeness, and the fact that she cannot leave this place even when she is openly rejected. Carnon and Ray are at the center of any conversation, and it is treated no better than a candlestick fixed in the wall. But she can't go anywhere since she's a millennial. Before rebirth, she would have gone to the center and began to show her importance, thereby emphasizing what a fool Ray is. Ray turns to her and tells her to go to them. Dorothy continues to think that there is not a single such thought in her head right now. She doesn't understand what's funny about all this. She just wants this time to end soon. She keeps calling Ray a fool, and that this is his place. She can't claim him. Even if he calls her, the problem won't be solved. And since she should just be standing here, it would be better to prepare a place for her to sit down. Theon comes up to her and says that she's bored. It's true. She turns around and immediately recognizes the voice. She sees a beautifully dressed Theon in front of her, with a red bow around his neck and a glass in his hand. Theon approaches Dorothy with a question, because she is bored. Is it so? Dorothy wonders why he is here. She thought he would be with Julia. He holds out a glass with a drink and asks her to drink it, because he sees that she hasn't had anything for a long time. Dorothy is glad that he noticed it, because it means that he was watching her all the time. She smiles broadly, stretches out her hand to take the glass and thanks Theon. She has thoughts in her head that this is pomegranate juice from Theon. She even feels sorry to drink. Theon says that Mr. Raymond was very proud of her, namely her open-mindedness. She asks again about Ray, who answers affirmatively that yes, that he says that Dorothy is learning all the imperial knowledge. Dorothy says she's not that great. Theon says it looks like they'll be able to meet in Epistemia soon. She holds a glass in her hand and thinks about the words. Epistemia is the best academy in the Empire, where only the most outstanding talents are trained, as well as the main place where the descendants of noble families, studying together, acquire connections for the future. There are people not only from Ubera, but also from neighboring Nerora, descendants of noble families come to Epistemia. However, unlike Ray, who could easily get into this academy, Dorothy, due to the fact that she should not outshine the Crown Prince, could not get into the Epistemium. One day she tried to resist this, went outside the palace and threw a stone towards Epistemia. But this stone broke the window and hit the eldest son of Duke Bront on the head. And after that Karnon locked Dorothy in the castle. Then the end was put in their relationship with Karnon. She thinks that there is no need to repeat this twice. She has long since abandoned any claims. She tells Theon out loud that she won't go to Epistemia. He asks how much, because she is a princess. He begins to say that he is sure of something for sure, but he looks forward, sees the Emperor with Ray. Dorothy notices this and thinks that Theon is pretty smart, so he knows how to shut up when he needs to, and that he understood exactly what the situation is here. She was sad because she didn't want to show herself to Theon like that. She decides to turn the conversation to any other topic. She smiles and starts saying that, if you think about it, the weather is today. She doesn't finish, because Julia shouts that Theon is called by the Archduke. Julia smiles brightly and waves at them. Theon apologizes to the princess, saying that it looks like it's time for him to go. She replies that nothing can be done. In her head, she thinks Julia has come to pick up Theon. Theon says goodbye, saying that they will see each other later. She remains alone again among numerous people. She thinks she needs to go to the room, too. Amid the hubbub and noise, she approaches the Emperor, saying that she has something to say. But suddenly some man accidentally pushes her and pomegranate juice spills on her dress, soiling the entire front of her clothes. The first thing Dorothy thinks about is that Theon gave her this pomegranate juice. The man panics and does not know what to do. The Emperor sees and asks what is going on here. The man apologizes and says that this is his mistake. The Emperor orders Dorothy to apologize to the man. She doesn't understand why. The Emperor hurries her to say it quickly. Everyone in the hall fell silent in anticipation. Ray intervenes, addressing the Emperor, saying that it was Dorothy who suffered. Here Dorothy simply and quickly apologizes to the man, whose name is Duke Bront. She bends down in front of him, looking down. Duke Bront does not understand and is worried, because he understands perfectly well that he is clearly to blame here. Dorothy says in her mind that she should apologize to Duke Bront, because he is a much more important guest than the cardboard princess. The Duke says it's okay, because it was his mistake. She continues to think and wonder what is difficult about some kind of apology, because Karnon has been behaving like this for more than a day or two. The Duke asks Dorothy to raise her head. She continues to think that if she takes everything to heart and gets upset, it will only make her worse. So she only needs to take it for granted. The Emperor orders the servant Robert to escort Dorothy, because her clothes are dirty. He listens and bows before him. The princess thinks it's a good thing because she has an excuse to leave, and that's enough. She goes with the servant, but decides to accidentally turn back. She sees Theon and Julia standing in complete shock. They show that they are worried. She asks herself if he has seen an awkward princess who has lost her last authority. She wants him not to look at her like that. She reflects that a glass of juice filled with scarlet love has been spilled again by emotions that have stained her. She is sitting alone in her room again, hugging her knees. To endure such a Karnon attitude towards her and apologize, leaving aside pride, is tolerable for her. But one look from Theon made her feel like she was being turned inside out. How funny, because she knows that Theon will never love her. She understands what to let go, however, it seems as if everything inside is on fire when she sees them together with Julia. She decides that she needs to let Theon go as soon as possible. Someone knocks and asks if she's okay. Ray is standing outside the door and says he came because he was worried. He asks her to come out to him. Dorothy gets angry and shouts at him to leave her alone and go back to his place. Ray insists that she won't go because she's here in the room. He explains that he is not interested in the reception, so let them play together. From these words, Dorothy becomes furious, leaves the room and orders him to open his ears and listen carefully. Ray is scared of her. She shouts at him that he can't leave there just because he's not interested, since he's the crown prince. So let him behave appropriately. Let him stop thinking only about games and do what he has to. She goes on to say that his worries here have not surrendered to anyone. She pushes him and asks him to just leave her alone. Ray doesn't know what to say. She continues that if he understood, then let. Suddenly, Theon and Julia come up to them and see her holding him by the collar. Theon asks, startled, if she's okay. Dorothy just looks at Theon in silence, confused. Theon, looking scared, asks if Dorothy is okay. He just looks at him in silence. Ray says he brought Theon and Julia to play together. She lets go of Ray, walks into the room and slams the door. Dorothy just stands at the door at first, and then weakly kneels down. She remembers Theon's frightened face and Julia's surprised expression. She wonders at what point everything went wrong. What will he think of her now? She thinks of herself as a pathetic and undeserving love. She concludes how much she hates herself. She covers her face with her hands and cries bitterly. She thinks she should live a kinder life than anyone else. This is a way of redemption for her. After that day, she couldn't get out of bed for several days. Her temperature rose and her whole body ached. The nurse takes care of her, calls her their little unhappy princess, and says that she should get well as soon as possible. Although it hurts her, but she must endure. She opens her eyes, repeats the phrase that she should be kinder than anyone. She doesn't finish it and falls asleep again. After all, right now it's the only thing she can do. So a few days flew by, during which Ray did not come to her. She is in her room on her bed reading a book again. She thinks he hates her now because she yelled at him like that back then. She thinks he annoyed her after all, so she's even glad. Her thought is interrupted. She sees someone out of the corner of her eye. She sighs and asks Ray, who is hiding, what he is doing. He is frightened by the question, comes out and says that he brought her a gift. Dorothy says it's not necessary. Ray says that she will definitely like this gift. He opens the basket and says that these are the first tomatoes he has grown. It turns out he secretly made a garden behind the palace. Dorothy clearly did not expect such a gift and is clearly not thrilled with it. Ray nervously asks if they have a beautiful color. He continues to say in excitement that he has also planted zucchini and eggplant. As soon as they grow, he will first of all bring. At this time, Dorothy thinks that the crown prince, who was officially accepted into epistemia, was wasting his time on the garden and plowing. She asks if he was not engaged in science, but grew this. He is even more nervous and replies that he also studied regularly. Dorothy sighs heavily and thinks that someone tried their best to win against him. And unlike Dorothy, he got everything effortlessly. He only played his favorite games all the time and took the place of the legitimate crown prince. Ray is worried and says that he really studied hard. He asks her if she is angry and asks for forgiveness. He mumbles that she refused last time, and he begged her to play with him. He clasps his hands against his palms, waiting for an answer. Dorothy relents and calls him. He listens to her attentively. Dorothy finally says that this way he will not be able to become a good emperor. After all, Dorothy decided to live kinder than anyone else this time. Ray scratches his head and agrees, saying that's right. Dorothy still thinks that after all, this desire not to let him become emperor is only because he cannot escape from the fate of a tyrant. Ray asks her to try the tomato after all, they are probably delicious. He says he brought them as soon as he picked them, and, of course, in epistemia he will try his best and will be a great big brother. He smiles at her happily. Dorothy turns away from him and thinks that it would be better if this fool did his job better properly. He mumbles again in hope and asks if she doesn't want to go outside sometimes. He says that he thought it was stuffy for her to sit in the palace all the time. Dorothy thinks that after all, if you think about it, she has not been outside the fortress wall until now, because she does not even study in epistemia. But in her previous life she was so bored that now she is not even curious, but he already knows all this. Ray already says loudly and confidently that she has never been outside the palace, and it's stuffy to sit inside all the time. Last time they stopped at the market, and there were a lot of goods from different parts of the continent. Dorothy is silent. He keeps saying that if she goes outside, he is sure that she will like it too, and she will feel a lot, since she is so smart, so maybe they will go outside with him. Here Dorothy interrupts him, saying she doesn't want to. Ray, almost with tears in her eyes, asks why she doesn't want to. She says she just doesn't want to. After that, Ray always followed Dorothy around with an offer to go outside together, to which she only briefly replied that she did not want to. And Ray wouldn't let up. He was already begging and begging her. Dorothy thought that he would calm down if she refused. However, when she opened the book, she found a note asking her to go together, and Ray's happy face immediately appeared. Dorothy decides she can't take it anymore and eventually agrees. Ray, of course, is happy, but here Dorothy makes a condition that she will go alone. She can go with a nurse or a night escort, but she will not go with him, Ray. Ray is sad, but still agrees because Dorothy agreed to go outside. Then the nurse tells the princess that how wonderful it is. Dorothy apologizes and asks if she should definitely go out in such clothes. She replies that, of course, because it suits her so well. Dorothy is dressed in a light knee-length dress of pale blue and lilac with flowers and bows. Her hair is loose, a flower is attached to her ear. Dorothy says she's so uncomfortable. The nurse says that she wanted to put these clothes on her so much, and finally the day has come when she will be able to see the sparkle of her walking outfit. The nurse concludes that she is so glad. She takes Dorothy's hand and tells them to go faster before she changes her mind. Dorothy is already regretting that she decided to go out. They find themselves in a market full of people. As soon as the thought flashes through Dorothy's mind that there are a lot of people here, the maid confirms her thoughts with a question. Because there are a lot of people here. The nurse advises to hold her hand tightly so as not to get lost and holds out her hand to Dorothy. The princess at first thinks that she is not a child, although now she is, of course, a child. She takes the nurse by the hand. In her previous life, she had never walked hand in hand with anyone here. She turns her face away from the nurse because she is embarrassed. The nurse asks to look at her in one direction and asks what she is looking at for the first time from here. She sees the sky endlessly, which shimmers with the sea. Everything is bright blue and green. She sees the whole area, how people work and talk, how people walk by the fountain. She remembers the war-weary city and the streets of people who looked more like corpses. In her memory there was a wind soaked with the smell of blood. She sees the whole expanse now and concludes that this is what an empire looks like without a tyrant. The nurse draws Dorothy's attention to the square where the musicians are giving a performance and suggests going to see it once. Dorothy wonders if she can enjoy this world a little. She squeezes the nurse's hand tighter and they walk towards the square. From the corner, a suspicious man can be seen grinning at the sight of the princess. Dorothy is 9 years old. She is lying tied up on the dirty floor. Her eyes are also tied. She can't see anything. There is a conversation going on in the background. It turns out she was kidnapped to get a ransom. Two criminals are sitting at a table and appetitiously eating chicken and discussing that some girl is wearing clothes more expensive than their whole house is worth, which infuriates them. Dorothy thinks that after rebirth, she has never picked up a sword, and that's what happened. Let's go back to the events that happened 3 days ago. The nurse enthusiastically asks how a princess can be such a cutie. Dorothy looks at herself in the mirror. She's wearing a witch hat. The nurse admires each image and offers to just buy everything. Dorothy asks to wait, but the nurse drags her to another place because it's fun there. Dorothy wishes she hadn't come out again. They walk quietly down the street. The nurse offers to buy her favorite books before returning to the palace since they are out. She says if you go into that alley, they'll see a bookstore. From such a proposal, Dorothy already had a desire. The nurse also suggests after going to the bookstore to go eat delicious desserts, and that this is a short way, so there are no people here at all. The wet nurse keeps saying she wants to see Dorothy happy, but they are followed by a man with a baton and hits the nurse on the head with it, that she just falls unconscious to the ground. Dorothy tries to make sense of what happened and wants to help the nurse, but a handkerchief stuffed with poison is brought to her nose and mouth, from which she slowly loses consciousness. And the last thing she hears is an offer to go have dessert with her uncle. Once she was an empress, and now she's lying like this in some kind of kidnapper's basement. It's hard to imagine a more pitiful sight. She thinks it's okay even if she dies early, but still she wouldn't want to die at the hands of such crooks. The two discuss that the wet nurse was sent for money 3 days ago, but still no news. Another suggests that for sure they will need time to prepare everything and deliver it to the Scarlet Well. Dorothy hears this and is surprised that she has been unconscious for 3 whole days. She was thinking why she has no strength and is so thirsty. She thinks that since they have sent a wet nurse, something will happen next anyway, but Karnan may refuse her. She assumes that Karnan will think that since they want money, they can get rid of her as if she were a played card. She decides that she cannot completely trust Karnan alone. Dorothy makes a sound. The two turn to her, assuming she's awake. She says out loud that she can't see anything. This method is not in her style. She orders them to untie her. A man approaches her. She thinks that first she needs to pretend to be a weak little girl. The man unties her eyes. She innocently greets him and politely asks the uncle who he is. He smiles, calls her a cute little girl. He introduces himself to Tudu. In her head, she thinks that these two are the kidnappers, but they look like some market bandits who have rolled out of nowhere. She asks him sweetly again, is he really going to be her wet nurse now? He replies that no, of course, he is not a wet nurse. Dorothy makes an innocent face and asks if he's really Dad's friend. And in her head she is just angry that her ladyship Dorothea Millenio was forced to portray such a thing. The guy laughs and says that's right, he's a friend of her dad. Dorothy asks if she can then call him Uncle Tudu, to which he happily agrees and allows. And in Dorothy's head, she thinks she's going to kill them. She is told that she is as beautiful as a doll, it seems, thanks to her noble origin. She remembers the past from the phrase that she is beautiful, where someone says that he is ready to do anything just to have a smile on her lips. The man who kissed her hand and asked her to smile at least once. There used to be one person who repeated the same thing to her over and over again. She concludes that, of course, she does not like her appearance, but it seems that she does not seem so terrible to others. She pretends to look around and asks where they are. He replies that they are at their uncle's house. She looks at his face and asks about the scar above his eyebrow, what is it, and what is cool. Tudu decides to tell the whole story. He says that before the uncle fought with terrible villains, 17 against 1. But the only weapon that could be used were his own fists. But one of these cowards pulled a knife out from under his clothes and attacked him, aiming at the heart, but he was able to dodge. Then he ends up saying that this is nothing, because after that Uncle Tudu drove the enemy into the forest, where he met with a bear. Dorothy, sitting next to him, just tries to listen carefully and clap her hands, like in admiration. In her head, she thinks that he wrote books better, but thanks to this, Dorothy had time to examine. She reflects and comes to the conclusion that, firstly, the situation is unprofitable. Her stomach rumbles. She pulls the edge of her uncle's t-shirt and says pityingly that she wants to eat. He exclaims that their little mistress is hungry and turns to Denny's, telling him this. He only indifferently answers with a question, and so what? Tudu says they have lunchtime, and the girl hasn't eaten for a long time. He sighs and says, okay to him, as if they have a children's camp here. Dorothy sees delicious sausages, scrambled eggs, bread and a whole chicken with lettuce leaves. She thinks they are enjoying a delicious meal, dreaming of the money they will get thanks to her abduction. She finds it disgusting, of course, but she has not experienced such a strong hunger for a long time. Tudu takes her in his arms, lifts her up and puts her at the table like a little child. Another asks where she sat down and let her go. He tells Tudu to pull himself together. Did he decide to play with her? He tries to justify himself, and Dorothy builds pleading and pitying eyes. He orders Tudu to tie her to a post. He resists, saying that he is an uncle. The other is just mad about this. At this time, Dorothy feels unwell and asks herself if she hasn't eaten for only 3 days. She feels like even more. Another guy tells Dorothy that they are not her uncles, and that they grabbed and kidnapped her. She plaintively asks why they did this. He pulls her by the hand and says that because of such rich dolls like her, everything inside turns over, which is already sickening to endure. She gets hit by pushing against the wall with her back. Then Denny's says that this is too much. The other does not agree, because it will happen sooner or later anyway. He asks Tudu if he really wants to die first. She was tied up at the stake. She is treated like a thing. It is unpleasant for her. Denny's calls Tudu a weakling and suddenly screams in fright. Tudu also does not understand what happened. Denny's says that there is something under the table that has such sparkling eyes in the dark. Dorothy wonders what scared them so much. It's a scorpion. She thinks that there are no scorpions in the capital, in that case. Meanwhile, Tudu and Denny's get scared and throw the responsibility of killing the scorpion on each other. Dorothy thinks she's hungry here, and they're yelling here. She suggests to the kidnappers that if she catches a scorpion, will they give her bread and milk? They do not believe and ask again if she will catch a scorpion. Dorothy replies that she will only need 2 sticks. They agree, but only if she catches a scorpion. Denny's orders Tudu to untie her. He unties her with a shudder, gives her chopsticks. She thinks that he has already looked at the gambling sticks. She does not understand why Scorpio scared them so much. She holds a scorpion by the tail with these sticks and informs that she has finally caught it. Those 2 tell her to throw him out or kill him. Dorothy says that she does not know how to kill. She is so hungry that she has no strength in her hands. Denny's tells her to throw it out, and as soon as she throws it out, they will give her food. She holds out the scorpion to them and asks, and tomorrow and the day after tomorrow they will also give food? They only quickly agree. She goes with this scorpion down a long staircase. They understand why it's dark all the time. They were underground. She goes out and sees the desert. She now understands why they don't really watch her, no matter where she looks. It's completely unclear where it's fashionable to go in this endless desert. She does not understand where the village is and who can know that she is here now. That's why she can't just run away. How can she find hope here? While the 2 are discussing something enthusiastically, Dorothy is eating bread. She thinks that they still keep their word, and that another scorpion would appear. Tudu shouts to Denny's that a princess has disappeared in the capital. They both look at Dorothy, continuing to say that someone has kidnapped her. Denny's understood something and tells Tudu to follow him. Dorothy silently wonders who it could be, but it was worth keeping everything a secret, if only for the sake of the well-being of the Imperial Palace. If these two want to survive, then they will not give her to the palace. She gets up from the table and reflects that, as she thought, waiting for Karnan is a crazy idea. She found a knife and decides that this should be enough. She overhears a conversation where they discuss future plans. They argue whether to take her life, because she is a child, but at the same time she is a princess. If she survives, she will betray them, and they will both end up in the grave. They decide that one will go get 2 camels, and the other will deal with the girl at this time. Dorothy realizes that her fate has already been determined. She looks at her reflection on the blade of the knife, so she had no choice but to pick up a knife. Denny's abruptly opens the door and says that they are in complete trouble, but he sees that the room is empty. She hid behind the door while he was looking for her. Then she decides to attack him with a knife. She realizes that there are few opportunities. There is only one way to win, since she is at a disadvantage. She swings and only scratches his back with the knife. He turns to her. Dorothy realizes that she has too little strength. The knife did not go deep, in that case further. She doesn't finish the thought because Denny's grabs her by the throat. But Dorothy wanted to stab his hand with a knife, but Denny's removes the knife from her hands and holds them tightly. The knife just falls to the floor with a sound. Denny's is furious. Dorothy doesn't have the strength, so she can't attack if she was even a little stronger. Denny's screams that he just wanted to let her die peacefully. He tells her not to twitch, because no matter how much she flutters, she can't do anything. From these words, Dorothy calms down and thinks about the phrase, "Is there absolutely nothing she can do?" She starts to get angry. Her teeth are grinding from these thoughts, that no matter how much she fluttered, she could not defeat Ray and could not get into epistemia. She kicks Denny's in the stomach so that he leans back. She continues to emotionally reflect on all the failures that he has not yet been able to attract Karnan's attention. She remembers Theon and concludes that he did not love her either. She takes a knife in her hand. And again she remembers that in the future, the subjects she trusted should also kill her. She stabs Denny's with a knife. Only his screams of pain are heard. He lies curled up and holding a leg pierced with a knife. Denny's begs her not to kill him. Dorothy sees those eyes again, the ones she often saw before rebirth. The eyes looking at the monster. She wonders why. She just wanted to live. She finally speaks out loud and asks that she just be left alone, and that she promised to be a good girl. She turns around and thinks again why everyone just can't leave her alone. Now she just wants everyone to let her just live to die. She goes out into the desert. She coughs from the wind and realizes that the sun is already setting. Night is already falling. She is cold from the wind. There is not a light in this desert. She is afraid of her impotence. She thinks that if she could control the spirit of light, it would be better for her than it is now. But then she thinks that no, if Ray were in her place now, surely everyone would have already come to save him. She falls to her knees and realizes that even now she is thinking about it. She considers herself ridiculous. She falls with her whole body on the sand and loses consciousness. A dark night full of bright stars and fluffy clouds. She moves her index finger slightly, opens her eyes and vaguely sees the desert and the bottomless, dark sky. She realizes that she has lost consciousness, wonders how much time has passed, and concludes that she will just die here. She thinks that dying alone, looking at the stars, is somehow too much for her. She sees a light on the horizon. She sees this light, hears the sound of hooves approaching her. She kneels down and calls God merciless. She thought she was finally dying, but he gives her the will to live again. She raises her hand and says softly that she is here. She has killed so many people in the past, but she still wants to live. She thinks maybe it was Karnan who sent them after her, but she also assumes that it could be bandits again. She collapses on the sand again. People have always turned away from her, but only such thoughts come into her head. It's funny to her, of course, but she's always been like that. Servants approach her and try to do something. Dorothy still thinks she wants to believe that someone will love her one day. Her name is Princess. She wants to believe that at least someone will love her. She slowly opens her eyes. She sees everything vaguely at first, and then everything becomes clearer. She sees the ceiling with a chandelier, blinks often. She looks around the room, familiar curtains, bedside table, cupboard with dishes, patterns. She understands that she is so back here again. She remembers someone calling her a princess in the desert. She thinks that this means she has encountered imperial knights. She wonders if this can be considered luck in the midst of a series of adversities. She hears a commanding voice asking the other what he just said. She immediately shudders, opens her eyes wide and recognizes Karnan's voice. She lifts herself up, straightens her back. There, the nurse makes excuses that they were some nameless kidnappers. Carnona says that means they were abducted by such worthless bandits. Dorothy thinks he came here because she was almost kidnapped. She reflects that, whatever it is, he is the father whose blood flows in her veins. She gets to her feet, trying to get out to him. But then she hears a terrible phrase from him that she is so much trouble. He orders not to make a fuss anymore, and to catch the one who gave this information out, and officially declare that these are just baseless rumors, and anyone who spreads them will be severely punished. The nurse bows and obediently agrees. Because of her greed, Dorothy began to think that Carnon's hatred for her had decreased, because she did not quarrel with Ray and did not take anything from him. But still he did not love her at all. She flops back into bed and decides that this is all punishment for being a tyrant, and now she is paying for the sins she committed in her past life. She lies down, turns the other way, covers herself with a blanket and continues to reflect sadly. That's right, she believes that everything is exactly like that. Otherwise it would be unbearable for her to endure all this. In the palace, the healer reports that the temperature has just dropped to a slight heat. Of course, the princess is recovering, but so slowly. Another servant asks if she is okay. Dorothy thinks she's seeing this babysitter for the first time. She begins to say out loud that compared to the past, here she indulges in her thoughts again, that it looks like her nurse was fired after all. But if you think about it, it wasn't her fault, because she was always kind and took care of the princess with all her might. She lies in her thoughts that since this has happened, she just hopes that everything will be alright with the nurse. The doctor tells her that Dorothy should still go to a quieter place to rest and recover. Another nanny says that it's still better for the princess to stay in the castle. Another says that there is a great place in the Seritan domain where you can improve your health. Dorothy somehow hears the words, realizes that, in other words, this is an opportunity for her to leave the palace and move away from Carnon, Ray, and Fionn with Julia, who will soon go to Epistemia, and also where no one will see her, to gain strength so as not to suffer as then. All this time she was afraid that she would re-enter the path of the tyrant, so she avoided this possibility. However, if she uses her power in the right way, maybe she can protect someone. She tells the servants out loud that she will go on vacation. To live well, you need strength. The nanny asks how it is possible to go there alone. Dorothy replies that it is too stuffy for her here. The servant says that she has never behaved like this, so why such stubbornness? Ray comes to her with flowers and informs her that the flowers have arrived. The nanny asks if he is young Lord Raymond. He asks Dorothy if she's okay today. Dorothy thinks he's been coming here every day since the kidnapping, so isn't he tired of it? Ray asks what they were talking about. The nanny replies that they discussed the possibility of the princess going on vacation to recover. Ray does not understand what kind of rest they are talking about. The servant replies that there is just a great castle in the Seritan domain where you can relax, because the climate is warm there, and proximity to the sea will help the princess to unwind. Ray is sad and worried that she is still much better unless she needs to go somewhere. Dorothy flatly says she wants to leave, and advises Ray to leave here. The one with the puppy eyes holds out her name. Dorothy turns to Ray and, just in case, says that the fact that she was kidnapped is not his fault, so he does not need to come in vain. But she lowers her eyes and with a sad expression on her face says that if he hadn't asked her to leave the castle, then this wouldn't have happened. Dorothy sighs, looks at him and says it doesn't matter anymore because it's all in the past. Ray climbs up to her with a hug and asks if she really needs to go to this other castle. She asks, what's the big deal? He replies that then she will be there alone. Dorothy thinks in her head that she's still here, kind of alone. Ray thinks and suggests to her that it is better to go to Epistemia together. He says he will help her, which means let her stay here with him. Dorothy coldly and clearly replies that she can't go there. Ray asks with a guilty smile why she thinks that. Maybe she was scared because he said that studying in Epistemia is too difficult. He tells her that his clever Dorothy can do it. He asks her not to give up so easily. Dorothy thinks about his words. Did she give up easily? She concludes that he really doesn't know about anything at all. And after all, with what diligence she studied, just to go there. On the day Carnon ordered her to refuse admission, how much did she? She does not finish the thought, decides that how could this fool know such a thing? She turns to him and says that everything has already been decided, that she will go to rest and recuperate. She asks him to stop talking about it already because she is so tired, and advises him to leave now. He only obediently leaves with a desire for Dorothy to rest. The door clicks. The nurse turns to Dorothy and says that young Mr. Raymond is behaving like this because he is worried about her. Dorothy says in her head that she knows that Ray is kind, and she is a villain, because that's always been the case. So the uninvited guest needs to disappear as soon as possible. A few days later, Dorothy does leave. She is dressed in a light dress for the trip. She has a hat on her head, a yellow bow around her neck. She thinks that at such moments she is grateful to Karnan for his indifference. She could not have imagined that she would leave so quickly. She remembers Ray crying and begging her not to leave. She thinks it's a good thing that Karnan told Ray not to come out, because just thinking about his brother is noisy. Someone calls her a princess. She turns and sees Theon. He tells her with a smile that he heard she was going on vacation. She looks at him, at first rejoices, and then thinks that she does not want to see him at all right now. She sadly, lowering her eyes to the ground, replies that yes, she is going to the Seritan domain. Then he asks why he suddenly asked. He replies that, to be honest, he came because he wanted to give her something. He says that it's a relief that he wasn't late. He reaches into his pocket with his hand. Dorothy asks the question, is it really a gift to her? He says that, of course, nothing special. He takes out of his pocket 3 candies of different colors, red, yellow, and blue. He says he brought it because he was worried that she might get seasick. Dorothy looks at him in silence, without holding out her hand. Theon awkwardly asks, maybe she doesn't like sweets at all. She can't believe in her head, is it really Theon for her? She answers out loud that no, she likes it. She takes the sweets from his hands and thanks him for his care. Theon blushes and sadly asks that now they will not be able to see each other, because she suddenly goes on vacation so far away. He says he's sorry. These words make Dorothy blush even more. Theon then expresses his hope that she will recover and return as soon as possible. Dorothy can't believe he's really sorry about her leaving. She looks at the candy and agrees with him. She thinks that in her past life she has never felt anything like this. Is she really Theon? But suddenly she forbids herself to think so, because anyway Theon. She squeezes the candy in her palm and leaves, saying that she will go better. Theon wanted to stop her, but restrains himself, clenching his fists, and says that he hopes they will definitely meet again. She is already riding in the carriage and persuades herself to be cool. She looks at these candies and thinks that, however, Theon has thought of her. Her heart is pounding from these thoughts. She smiles and hugs these candies to herself. Clear sky, blue sea with waves, from which white foam comes out from hitting the rocks. Pleasant wind, bright sun. Dorothy is surprised and admires the whole view. She is wearing a red dress with bows, her hair is tied in 2 ponytails. She could not have imagined that she would be able to breathe deeply once she left the Imperial Palace, the place where she killed Ray. And then Theon died. If you think about it, she has only bad memories in the palace. That's right, everything turned out well. There is no trace of her being a tyrant in this place. He is still looking with a warm smile at these 3 candies that Theon gave. She thinks that maybe this is where she can start from the beginning. Someone knocks and calls her princess. It's the maid of the castle, Kara, who is worried about her because she asked her to wait a little. And what if she gets lost? She says that now they should only go with her. Dorothy thinks she's looking out for a weak princess in such a wilderness. It looks like she's been greatly demoted, but she's only a princess in appearance. So her interest in Dorothy will be short-lived. Clara says there is someone she would like to introduce. A man comes out to her. The servant says that he will serve her under her guidance. This is the knight Stefan Greenwall. He's a tall guy with dark hair, dark skin, and a scar on one eye. Dorothy sharply recalls the past, where he is sitting on his knees in front of her, and she tells him that the princess is addressing him. But he does not answer. She's with a sword in her hand. There's blood all around. She calls him the same impudent as always. He is kneeling in front of her with an arrow in his abdomen. This is the one who has reached the rank of vice captain. Dorothy tells him that it's a pity, because she really wanted to compete with him, and at such moments the wisest decision would be to answer her. In the best knightly order of the future called Radiance. She puts the sword on his shoulder and talks about the hope that he will not regret his choice. One day he died at her hands. Returning to the present, Stefan and Dorothy look at each other for a long time. The princess thinks that he is now 18 years old, which means that he has just entered the Shining. And at the moment when he needs to gain experience and abilities to advance. He came here because of one weakling, a princess. And if you think about it, he seems unhappy to her. She holds out her hand to him and says she hopes for him. Clara is surprised that she has such a radiant greeting. But the knight does not extend his hand to her and stands silently. Clara hints to him about a handshake. He also holds out his hand, but does not squeeze it, but only slaps it on the palm. Clara looks at him in shock. Dorothy thinks, did she ask to slap her hand? He, as always, is insolent in the presence of the princess. Already in the hall, Dorothy, signing some document, thinks that the fact that she met Stefan just a couple of minutes ago suggests that one desire is not enough for a prosperous life, because life is not going the way she wants. She writes a wish list for a prosperous life, so in order to achieve her goal, she needs to create her own criteria. However, she wonders what it means to live kindly in general. She thinks hard and tries to come up with something. A servant approaches her and asks her to try dessert. She brings cookies and tea with milk. Here Dorothy sharply asks Clara what needs to be done to live happily. Clara thinks at first, and then says that first you need to obey your parents. Dorothy says to tell her something else. Clara stops talking and asks what she's doing. She sees a piece of paper with the name and laughs. Stefan appears behind her and also tries to spy on her. Dorothy abruptly closes the paper and asks angrily and awkwardly why they are laughing. Clara replies that a prosperous life sounds so cute, so she couldn't resist. Stefan in the background nods in agreement. Dorothy thinks that these words don't go with her at all. Clara asks why she writes like this, to which Dorothy replies that it's just like that. And in his head he says that, of course, in order to live safely. Clara offers her to give Dad a massage 10 times. Dorothy presents this picture, calls it disgusting and asks not to suggest such a thing. Clara says that if you don't like it, then how about smiling 10 times a day? She justifies this theme so that everyone will become brighter from a smile. Stefan nods again in silent agreement. Dorothy thinks it's not that she doesn't like to smile, she just had nothing to smile about, that's all. But if you think about it, the first thing that comes to mind about a kind person is a smiling face. She remembers Ray with a big smile and concludes that there is some truth in Clara's words. She smiles and wonders if that's how it's done. But abruptly her mouth twitches. Her attempts have already caused a spasm on her lips. Clara asks what is wrong with her. She pushes the two of them, asking them to come out for a minute because she wants to think. Clara says she would like to observe. The door closes. She picks up a pen and starts writing. First, smile in a friendly way every day. Second, do not look at someone else's. The throne belongs to Ray, and Theon belongs to Julia. The third, save 1,000,000 people. She thinks saving people is kind enough. She reflects on how many people died through her fault in her past life, not only the people she killed with her own hands, but also those who died during the wars unleashed by her, and the exhausting work through her fault, catastrophes and illnesses that she could not prevent. She is sure that at least 500,000 people died because of this. People who could have lived if Ray had become emperor died because of her. Therefore, as a penance, she wants to save 2 times more in this life, and 3 times a week to hear words of gratitude, every month to donate more than 1,000,000 blands to charity. She looks at the list and thinks that this is enough for a successful life. She goes out on the balcony, stretches and thinks how tired she is. She looks at the sea. Then she approaches the servants and informs them that she will go to the sea. Stefan and Dorothy are walking along the shore. She looks at Stefan and thinks that she said she wanted to go to the sea, and he followed her, but, fortunately, he does not interfere, and is silent. She takes off her hat and thinks how quiet it is. It seems to her as if she is alone. While walking, she notices a man sitting by the shore. She wonders who it is. Does someone else live in the vicinity besides the inhabitants of the castle? He sees a blonde boy with golden eyes, from which tears are pouring. She sees him and recognizes him as Edenbrot. He was the most important confidant of the tyrant Dorothea Millenio, and the most beautiful man in the world she knew, and he was also the most dangerous.